right. We are live, everyone. Welcome back to Reasoned Answers.
It's as good as waging war against Allah and His Messenger.
Happy Holy Saturday for those in the West, or happy Easter morning for those in the East. As we seek to celebrate the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, thought it would be a good time to address some rumors that are going around. Some rumors that we might accidentally be worshiping pagan deities when we celebrate Easter due to some of our customs that we have and things along that line. Since this is a very important topic, I thought that we should have some ninja level scholarship here today. So we have on Mary Harb. Welcome, Mary. Anything you want to say as introduction? And I am not hearing you at the moment. Off to a great start. We tested it before we went live and everything was fine. And now that we're live, can't hear Mary. All right, well, while she's figuring that out, let me take a couple comments from the audience here. Rob Reed says, can I eat the wrong God, though? Because the wrong God is delicious. Protestant believer says, got me some Ishtar eggs. Snoopy says, never thought chocolate Easter bunnies would look like that, in reference to the thumbnail. And Andrew said, AI design aesthetics. So it does kind of have that AI art feel to it. However, this is actually not AI generated. I found some individual. This is supposed to be a statue of the Egyptian rabbit god Unut, and that might not be the correct pronunciation. Not an expert on Egyptian gods, but they were selling statues of this god, and I did a lot of messing with the colors and contrast and applied some effects in order to make it really pop and, well, look like chocolate. So that's how we got our thumbnail.
Whoa. Okay, it is working now, finally. All right, I don't know why, but today it just spontaneously decided to not allow me to use my headset volume. So I have to use this. I actually will try to leave and come back and see if I can fix it that way. There's no way for me to use my headset without it, and it's recognizing my headset.
Yeah, it was working before we started. We started up, and then we have problems. Go figure, go figure. Mary will be right back. Snoopy Egyptian rabbit. Yeah, so that's why the borders are hieroglyph-like. Those are AI generated, incidentally. The border is AI generated. So because this is supposed to be an Egyptian goddess, I used some hieroglyph-like characters for the border there. No actual words in, no secret message or anything. Una says, I think you mean Mary Hajj. So you're going to go on a Hajj today, Mary?
Can you hear me? Nope.
Kind of. It's extremely faint, though.
Yeah, I don't know why that's happening. It was working perfectly fine when I'm in the entry, and then it just disappears whenever I come all the way in. It's very odd. So when I'm in the entry, it says, test your audio source. Working fine. And then as soon as I go out of that and into the actual room, it's like, no, you can't have this. Nice thing for you. So I'm afraid that my audio quality will be a little bit lower today. I should just get a standalone mic that I can leave here, but I haven't gotten one yet. I'm sorry, guys. All right.
We'll forgive you. We'll forgive you. So what are we going to be talking about, Mary? You want to give a brief overview before we get to the actual subject?
So it's going to mainly be the main arguments connecting Easter somehow to a figure called Eostre or Ishtar or anything of that sort, and the rabbit claims. These are the two things that we are going to address today. So, in excruciating detail and with much evidence again. So,
as per usual, we wouldn't have it any other way from you. So You may not have heard, I asked if you were going to be on Hajj today, because Una points out when you're on this outfit, you're often on Hajj.
Yep.
All right. And Matt says someday Thaddeus should come in full niqab. He wouldn't have to comb his hair or wash his face. Indeed, that's a benefit, right? That's part of the reason why Mary sometimes comes in niqab is because she didn't have time to do her makeup and whatnot. All right, so I do have a clip as an introduction for us today. So let me start with that. So this is from Your Brother in Christ's channel. He has a video out on exposing the pagan origins of Easter in the skeptic zone. So here we go.
And that's why I'm giving you this most solemn duty to transform the venerable Resurrection Day into a more inclusive and equitable affair.
But my lord, if we were to take the holiday and infuse it with pagan rituals and give it would confuse the parishioners. They would have no idea what's going to happen.
Enough! Am I not the Emperor of Rome? The East and the West? I have spoken. Make it so.
But my lord, do you have an example, some suggestions for us to use? What we possibly have to use, or maybe a parade?
Welcome to the realm of theological intrigue, where the clergy finds itself enmeshed and wrapped in a complex web of tradition, politics, and the unyielding march of revisionist history. This anachronistic monastery exists at the edge of reality itself, a cynic shrine to a time that never was, the laws of which appear and exist only in the mind itself. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a wondrous world of pure imagination. The next stop, the skeptic zone.
All right, so if you want to see the rest of the video, including a guest appearance by some weird monk Thaddeus guy, you'll have to check that out on Eric's channel. I'll put a link to that in the video description, or I mean in the live chat now. I'll also put it in the video description later. So, what do you think, Mary? Are these claims pure imagination, as was declared there in the skeptic zone?
They are indeed pure imagination. Not only that, but they rely on some of the most embarrassing, honestly, ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism, thinking that the only people in history that matter, the people who are central to history, are German-speaking peoples. That the white Germans are the ones who are the primary preoccupation of totally different groups. From hundreds of years before they were doing anything but running around and herding cattle and raiding people. They were living in mud huts, raiding other people, and skirmishing on the edges of actual empires, utterly illiterate and threatening in the same sort of way that Mongols are threatening. They were barbarians, but somehow they're supposed to be the only people that actually matter in the world, because I guess people projected that one day some descendants of some of those people were going to form the British Empire or something. I don't even know. So let's
exactly.
jump into it.
Mr. Rocks is giving Constantine too much credit over here. Well, you know, it's pure fantasy, and every conspiracy theory about the Christian church usually starts with Constantine and or the Council of Nicaea. So obviously, if you're going to make your pure fantasy about how Christianity came to be, you got to include Constantine in that. All right, let's, you got to reshare your presentation, Mary, when you left.
Oh, yeah, because I left. Sorry about that.
Yep.
It's like, why is it coming up? Well, because I didn't reshare it. Now I'm sharing it. There we go.
All right, let's get that on the screen for everyone to see. Is Easter pagan? Take it away.
So, This is the kind of image that the usual sort of intelligence of people who represent neo-paganism like to present online. The modern Wiccans have about this much sense that they think that there was this goddess of spring and fertility called Eostre, who had as her symbol a rabbit and eggs because their birth, and then the story of the resurrection is somehow that stolen, right? So there are four big arguments surrounding this supposed figure Eostre. The first one is the flat-out assertion that Easter is named after the Germanic goddess Eostre, that Eostre is a Babylonian or Sumerian goddess Ishtar, Inanna, the origin to the figure to whom the name Ishtar was later applied, is actually Sumerian. Eostre was, the third assertion is that Eostre was a goddess who was associated with fertility and rabbits, which led to the Easter bunny. And then fourthly, that Easter is clearly a pagan fertility holiday, celebrating the rebirth of the year in spring. All of these are equally intelligent, as we will discover.
Excellent. So just real quick, before you celebrate Easter tomorrow, just you gotta educate yourself as to what you're actually doing, and so be prepared. Be prepared to totally change your plans for tomorrow once you learn the dangerous truth, or something like that.
All right. So the first assertion is that Easter is totally named after the Germanic goddess Eostre. Now, in the Germanic languages, Easter is directly named, in some Germanic languages, rather, Easter is directly named after the Anglo-Saxon or Germanic lunar month in which the celebration of the resurrection fell. So there was an existing Germanic calendar with a month called Eostre month or Eostre month, depending on who's rendering it, which manuscript you're looking at, right? And from that month name, it got applied to the holiday that always fell in it, because it always fell in the lunar month at that time. Now, this sort of coincidence or kind of thing associating with the old time of year, the old month name, with a specific new introduced holiday that is foreign is not at all uncommon in the Germanic languages. Lent, what does Lent mean? Nobody knows what Lent means. It's a very odd word, and the reason is because it is a holdover from a time period word as well that was pre-existent in pagan times, that the fast acquired the name of a pre-existing period in the year, a seasonal period. Yule also was the name of two different months. There was former Yule and latter Yule, and that got applied to the holiday that was in the time of actually the end of what would have been former Yule. Now, Yule itself was, of course, considered antiquated usage in the High Middle Ages, and it only gained popularity again under Romantic influence. It was just kind of forgotten. But Lent wasn't. What we call it now standard, we call the resurrection fast, we call it Lent. Now, it's also notable that this only has this name in some, but not all, Germanic languages. So the Nordic languages are Germanic if we're talking about Proto-Germanic, right? Whenever you talk about the Germanic language family, it includes the Nordic languages. But those got completely left out, and actually in Dutch also doesn't use this term. So the idea that the resurrection celebration was derived from a Germanic pagan holiday requires that the source of the Christian narrative be up in particular location of these Germanic tribes at this time, or otherwise oriented specifically for them at the time that it was developed.
So good news, Mary. Good news here. In case you're wondering why I was chuckling, and we got Alan Olive in the chat here with some very advanced, amazing arguments that will destroy all of our belief in Easter. He says, yes, it's pagan. Obviously, I think this is supposed to say about. It's about fertility, bunnies, and chickens. No, I'm not dumb, Mary. It's obviously a pagan ritual. I'll never refer to Passover as Easter again. And then the one that really made me chuckle. Wow, you pagans aren't serious about your bunnies and chicks. I don't recall anyone saying anything about bunnies or chickens in the chat other than you, Alan. But apparently we're serious about it because we care about the facts of the matter and don't just declare it's obvious based on our imagination or some anti-Catholic rhetoric that someone heard or whatever the case may be. That Christians they took pagan customs about bunnies because the fertility gods had bunnies. It's obvious, people. It's obvious. So where's your sources? That's what my question will be. Where are your sources? Mary's going to present a whole bunch of sources. She's going to present actual data. And we don't need to get over ourselves for being pagan Protestants, whatever that means, because that's actually interesting, because usually it's anti-Catholic rhetoric that makes people say that Easter is pagan. But apparently, you're suggesting that it's a pagan invention, or I mean, sorry, a Protestant invention, all these so-called pagan customs. So I guess you're on a different page, right? I made a bad assumption when I said anti-Catholic rhetoric, made a bad assumption. But either way, how about some facts? How about some facts? That
Yeah.
It would be what I would appreciate from you in the chat. And then just one
Alan's
other
an
thing.
apostate who wants to pretend that his false piety means anything. He wants to observe Talmudism and things like that. So he is an apostate. That's fine. But looking here, these are the names of the Resurrection Sunday in various places. And these are the different colors just tell you the ultimate origin of the word. So almost all of them, the vast majority of them, not almost all, but the vast majority of them refer specifically to the Passover because the resurrection happened 3 days after the Passover, or to the resurrection or great day. It's usually just great day. So the pink is Passover. This green is great day. And then there are a few that refer to the fact that you stop fasting then. So flesh taking or meat taking in Estonia, for example, means it's the end of the fast. And Hungarian as well, both are focused on the end of the fast. And there are a few others that are from words like to pass, to grow, associated with resurrection, growth, etc. To get to arrive, one-offs. Easter and Ostern, those two, and its very close relatives, are a minority. And not only that, but some areas of Germany still also use Pascha for Passover as well. So you're already claiming that the origin of the celebration is coming from somehow this word that only a few places use.
Who ate the apple?
Is somehow about the origin of this celebration. All right, go ahead. You can bring up Twister Killer again. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So, well, actually, I want to do what's his name, Alan first. He's like, no one mentioned an apple. You guys are serious pagans. Because someone triggered the apple animation, of course, a channel inside joke has nothing to do with Alan, but because someone triggered an apple, that means we're serious heathens. Apples, only heathens like apples, everyone. Just so you know, if you like apples, you must be a heathen. That's the only way I can make sense of this logic. And before I bring back up Twister Killer's comment, I did want to also make a point about what Mary was saying here, which is actually quite relevant, right? Because the only reason anyone will say that Easter is derived from this god or that god is because of some vague linguistic similarity when you compare the terms in English. But here's the thing, right? Most of the world doesn't speak English. Most of the world speaks other languages. And as Mary showed, most of the words for Easter, where they have the same customs that somehow are associated with this goddess that has a vague similarity to the word Easter, they got all that from this goddess because of an English word that comes 1,000 years later, has some linguistics similarities. If this is actually right, if this was actually where Christians were getting their Easter customs, you'd think that this would be the dominant term for the event in various different religions. Or sorry, various different countries, I mean. Twister Killer, all right. I show you respect. Extend my condolences to you for the death of your God on the cross and appreciate me by insulting my God. Shame on you, condolences. Well, I haven't mentioned your God, which is interesting. Oh. You, that's actually amazing. I figured out what he meant by I insulted God. I said that he was as stupid and childish as his God, which then he interprets as an insult of his God, meaning that he actually admits that he's stupid and childish. How dare you say my God is also stupid and childish as well. But as far as his first half here, you don't need to extend your condolences. Why don't you read my community post where I explain that this is both the greatest day and the worst day when God dies. Yes, he has an end of bodily life. He doesn't cease to exist, but he does die. He took on flesh. He became fully man. And like all men, he dies. But what does he do before he dies? He takes the sin of the world upon himself and destroys that sin along with the body. And thus it is also the greatest of days. So no condolences needed. I will, however, extend my condolences to you who continue to live in your sin and bear the responsibility for your own sin, which will lead you to hell if you don't repent. So my condolences to your refusal to accept the truth. And yes, Twister Killer is a Muslim. He comes in here every once in a while. All right, Mary.
Sorry about that. Okay, so to drink, I have to turn off the camera in this stupid outfit. It's that idiotic. I could get a straw. I should do that. All right, so the first claim is still that the Easter itself is named after a goddess, but it's not. It's named after the month. So to be able to be named after the goddess, then everything must be set up to align with the month in this way. This is a pre-existing month. So the timing of this holiday has to have been chosen to align with this, or otherwise it's a coincidence and there's nothing pagan about it, right? That would indicate that the people who established the date were especially concerned with the conversions of non-Nordic Germanic tribes, a very specific group of tribes. That's what they cared about more than anything else, because they aligned their entire calendar to cause this pagan coincidence because they thought that making it like this would make it align or something like that. Now, we know about the earliest discussions concerning the celebration of Easter, the resurrection of our Lord. The controversy arose about when to decide it or when to celebrate, whether or not it should always be on Sunday or always 3 days after Passover, and which was more important. By the mid-2nd century AD, by 150 AD, in the generation after John died, the churches started coming into conflict because they had developed different practices. And some of them said, look, we had John, and this is when we celebrated it when he was alive. And other ones said, yeah, well, we had other apostles who were here at our churches for periods of time, and we celebrated it then according to their teachings. So they did not, none of the disciples apparently considered this particularly important. And it was a very early thing that was especially remarked. And so notice that they are both tied in some way to Passover. Should it be always 3 days after Passover, no matter what day of the week Passover falls, or should it be a Sunday following Passover, or when Passover should be? Also, should we allow Jews to continue to calculate Passover and just go with what they calculate and bow to Jews as Alan wishes to do continually? Alan is a slave to Jews and does what Jewish authorities tell him to do, or is there no more authority in those who reject Christ, and so their calculations or observations are now unimportant and we should make our own? Now, this wasn't able to really be settled until the Council of Nicaea, when enough people from far enough away could come together and discuss things. Even though it was technically settled then, a number of people just went off and did their own things anyway, in spite of the ruling, for several hundred years before everyone eventually slowly lined up. Now, according to the folks who insist on this connection, that Easter celebrations are derived from paganism. They're saying that paganism is the source, Easter month, and the derivative is the Christian resurrection celebration. That would require that all of these churches, various churches, are choosing both dates to align with Germanic Eostre month or Eostre month, or Monath, Easter month. I guess because they thought that the Germans were the master race and wanted to convert them easily, because that's really the only way that you can go.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. This is clear proof that the Germans are indeed the master race. They're so influential and powerful that they cause the Romans, who view them as pagans, to adopt their cultures. Barbarians.
Yeah, barbarians.
Yeah, pagans too vague, right? Barbarians, savages, subhuman creatures almost is how the Romans view them. And yet, apparently, they're so awesome that the Romans borrow their terms.
Yes, that's basically what they're saying. Now, other people make weaker claims that, oh, you've allowed these instances of things that existed in paganism to infiltrate the church. But that's not the strong claim that most people make. People are making the claim that Easter is derived from this pagan celebration. So the only way for that to happen is if all this is engineered to align, for it to be derivative of. Now, note that both calculations methods would land in the lunar Germanic month of Eostre, because the date of Passover had been fixed for many centuries already, even according to the most radical and moronic documentary hypothesis scholars. So they would say approximately 600 BC in that range. Or if you go by traditional accounts, by Moses himself in around 1440 or 1240 BC, depending on whether or not you do early or late Exodus. So both calculation methods require, if Christ lived and died, and that he was our Passover lamb, etc., this requires time-traveling uteruses, because all of these things are pre-established hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years before Christianity, when this was going to take place, with absolutely no regard to anything the Germans were doing or anyone else. as I will establish in a moment. So the debate about whether or not you should do any day of the week or whether or not you should do Monday, any day of the week, as long as it's a certain time after Passover, or you should do Sunday, is about what is more important, its connection to Passover or its representation of the first day of new creation, the establishment of the establishment of the church and the new covenant. And the churches as a whole decided that the symbolism of the new covenant was far more important. That's why they all met on the first day anyway. That is why only incredibly ignorant people think that we ought to be meeting on the seventh day. So anyone who is a seventh day observer and thinks that that's when Christians should be meeting, they are against the practice of the disciples after Jesus died. From Jesus's resurrection thereonward, Christians met every Sunday. And Christ came to them on Sundays. Why? Because it is symbolic of the first day of the continuing eternal day in which we live, of the new creation and of the new covenant and of the eventual actual new creation. So if you wish to be an apostate, if you wish to deny what the disciples taught, if you wish to go against the apostles and oppose them and set yourself up above them as holier and more knowledgeable in scripture than they are, then you say, oh no, we should be having church on Saturday. No one did that. No one did that until recently, because honestly, recently very uneducated people could inexpensively buy Bibles and then distort them to their own destruction. Because if you have to spend a lot of money on it, you end up spending a lot of money on education, and you're able to have basic reading comprehension. So
Scholarly Denizen makes a good point as well. He says the Christian East also always celebrated Easter, and I don't think those cultures were invaded by Germanic tribes. They had no influence from the Germanic tribes that supposedly worshipped this Eostre god. So there you go.
So it was the group that was centered in Jerusalem and Antioch. Jerusalem and Antioch were the two outliers that wanted to celebrate it 3 days after Passover, which was still in Easter month. It was still in the same Germanic month, because they both happened to have lunar calendars, and that happened to be the month. So
let me also take this comment from Alan. So I've been asking Alan for some evidence of his position. He's made comments like, why is all you guys are doing is insulting me, which is very funny because he comes in and he's insulting everyone, not providing one shred of evidence for his position. Here's a good example of his level of argument. Mary, you're not God, honey. Mary, did you think you were God?
No, but he does. He thinks that he is more, that he knows the scripture better than the disciples do and better than the apostles do, and he is correcting them. That's what he thinks.
So this is as close as he's come here to evidence yet. He says the evidence is that Jesus was crucified during the Passover. Correct? Don't deny that. No mention of Easter from early church. Well, if you mean the English word Easter, yeah, that's true. They didn't use the English word Easter because they didn't speak English. In fact, the English language hadn't even been invented yet. So yeah, that's correct that they didn't use the word Easter. And then you said, and they observed Easter. So no mention that they observed Easter. Well, wait a minute. If by Easter you just mean celebrating the resurrection of Christ, then they absolutely did that. So you're going to have to actually define what you mean by Easter if it's not just the English word. If you just mean the English word, then you're correct. They didn't use that word. Guess what? They didn't use the word Christ. They didn't use the word Jesus. They didn't use the word Bible. They didn't use the word New Testament. Oh my gosh, we got to get rid of the Bible and the New Testament and Jesus because they didn't use those terms because they did speak English. Oh, okay. So let's see if you have an actual point, right? And please explain whatever actual point you think you're making here. And don't say just roll your eggs to your heart's content. Give me an actual argument. I want facts, argument, please, desperately. I want something that we can respond to. You just making idiotic comments is not something to respond to.
All right. So anyway, yeah, you shouldn't call it Passover because it's not Passover. You're not very intelligent because because this happens on the Feast of First Fruits. So why are you calling it Passover? Can you not read your Bible? Passover was the day that Jesus was crucified, and it is not the day that the vast majority of the early churches celebrated yearly as his crucifixion. They always did it on a Friday because they thought the day of the week was more important symbology in this, the new covenant, than something that ended with that time in the old covenant. So anyway, so this was supposedly settled at the Council of Nicaea, which famously also condemned Arianism. Now, this made zero difference as to whether or not it was in the month of Eostre or not. It's still in the month of Eostre. Both of them are in the month of Eostre. Now, the first Germanic tribes who converted en masse to Christianity in the 4th century were inside of the Roman Empire, the same as the mass conversions outside of the cities in the Roman Empire. If you keep going on, forgot to turn off my phone.
All right. Well,
Wait 1
Mary is
second.
doing that real quickly. I just want to acknowledge that the Black Doctor is in the chat. If you want to join, just let me know. I'd be
Yes.
happy to have your thoughts on this because he already made one great comment here. Although people don't necessarily claim Easter comes from Nicaea, which is funny if you know what they actually did at Nicaea. In any case, he said Nicaea was primarily an Eastern council, so how could a council that's predominantly of Eastern bishops choose to align their worship to Western barbarians? Similar point was made earlier, right? The East is adopting the exact same customs, same dates as the West, and why are they choosing Germanic savages to pick their date? Well, of course they're not, but I would like Alan to explain why.
So now Muslims observe Passover. I think that you are a special short bus rider now.
I don't know if this was supposed to be ironic or what, but there you go.
Yep.
All right.
All right. So it's also important to note that Council of Nicaea affirmed Trinitarianism as well. However, the conversion of the Germanic tribes outside of the confines of the empire was undertaken by Arian missionaries because they kind of could leave the Roman Empire where they were getting in trouble and weren't supposed to be teaching those things and run off and try to get a whole bunch of other people believing their false doctrine of Arianism by going out to these Germanic pagans. So they were initially converted to Arianism. So if Nicaea established the celebration of the resurrection in the month of Easter so that it aligns with the Germanic goddess Eostre, why was it the Arians who were condemned at the council who first converted these people? Were they working together somehow? Did they get half of what they wanted and half not what they wanted? What's even going on? So, note that the first Nicene Trinitarian missionaries were finally sent to the Germanic tribes in the 490s, considerably later. Thus, the date of Easter, even within the month of Easter, was set 160 years or so before anyone cared to send Trinitarian missionaries to Germanic lands, and the month itself 350 years before any missionaries, Trinitarian missionaries, were sent. Now, being that in the time by the time the debate arose about when to celebrate it, this leaves only the refuge of Easter is named after a German goddess, as requiring that the Gospels themselves were entirely forged with the sole purpose of converting the non-Nordic Germanic peoples in order to have God resurrect in the month that was named after a spring fertility goddess. And all the manuscript dating, every history in the world, everything else were entirely forged to hide this, apparently in the 400s or 500s AD. All of history was made up, all of history was forged, all of history was invented. Now, the weaker claim is that all of these things are actually coincidences. And it's just that when the missionaries got to this particular Germanic peoples, they decided that it would be easier to convert them by adopting all of these pagan things and then saying that somehow they were still worshiping the correct God whenever they did all these pagan things. That would be the weaker claim, probably Allen's claim. But that is a particularly stupid claim, because how on earth would saying that all of these pagan things you're doing are fine, all of these things you do to worship your goddess are fine, but you should pretend they're about our God now? People don't work that way. They just don't. It's not the way human beings work. Oh, okay, we should continue doing all of those things because this other totally different God would like them too. Now we're just going to apply them to him. No, it's stupid. It's invented, and we'll explain why. But the entire claim that Easter is linked to a pagan goddess and derives from paganism, it reeks of this Germanic supremacy, cultural blindness, and bigotry. You're saying that these barbarians that no one really cared about were so important that everything was arranged to have things line up with some religious festival that they had. So here's the refinement. The name Eostre was chosen for Easter to let priests swap out Jesus for a pagan festival with minimal disruption. Now, this assumes that the priests arrived in Germanic territories and recognized parallels between Christian resurrection and a pagan spring goddess fertility festival that coincidentally occurred in a month named after her. They then reassigned all the same elements of the pagan spring goddess fertility festival to the Christian resurrection. Then from this, you've already lost any real origin in pagan Eostre for any religious element of Jesus's birth, life, death, resurrection, its timing, or its meaning. You don't even have the lamb dinner in there because that's never tacked onto the Eostre myth, right? You don't even have like what people typically eat at Easter time tacked in there. You've lost it all. You're reduced to claiming that eggs and bunnies are remnants of Eostre that were co-opted from an existing pagan celebration. That's your best claim. That is your best claim, Alan, that there were these elements that got co-opted. But for that to happen, Eostre has to exist. And guess what? She didn't. She doesn't exist. So the only source in all of history for any reference to a Germanic goddess named Eostre is Bede, the Venerable Bede. He is not a pagan. He did not live in times of paganism. He did not live at the same time that pagans lived. He lived a couple of generations after the Christianization of England. So he said, so he gave a list of months and gave meanings for them. Now, there are three columns here. The first column is what Bede gave as a list of months. The second one is a martyrology written in the 800s. So Bede is in around 730. Martyrology is in the 800s. It's also Anglo-Saxon. Then there's something called the Menologium, which was a continental Germanic Christian document that has the old Germanic months from around 1000 AD. Now, he has a Eostre month. They have Monath. They have Easter Monath and both of theirs. and he glosses these in different ways. So Yuli, he calls midwinter. Solmonoth, his cake month. Then two of them, he says, are the month of goddesses. There's a month of goddess Rheda, which is different than the name of the month given in the Mythologium, which is also different from, there are a number of other sources that talk about that same month, and Lida or Hlida tends to be the more common reference than Hreda month. There are only two sources that give that as the name. Then there's supposed to be the month of the goddess Eostre, then the three milkings month, and then there's the gentle good for sailing month before and after. There's the weed month, the month of the holy rites or sacrifices, the winter waxing, fulfilling fullness. So this is in reference to the winter's full moon, the first full moon of winter. Then there's blood month, and then midwinter. And it's a little bit confusing that this is called a moon that begins the winter the winter of the year, but that was because they had 6 months for they only had summer and winter. So the beginning of autumn was the beginning of winter, actually. It's actually why we call the first day of summer midsummer, still from this idea of there only being two seasons, winter and summer. So winter was fall and winter, summer was spring and summer. So.
All right. So just so you know, another genius has joined the chat here. I wasn't sure if this was a serious comment or not, so I didn't bring it up right away, but it does turn out to be a serious comment. He actually believes this. Easter is Babylonian practice, so the world loves Easter egg hunt, LOL. I asked him what his evidence for this was. He said the Bible. I asked him where the Bible says that Easter is Babylonian. Perhaps it's found in the book of the Council of Nicaea or something along those lines. He, of course, had no answer to that. He just says lukewarm Christians follow the worldview instead of biblical instruction. You know what? You know what fake self-righteous Christians do? Pharisaical Christians do? They invent nonsensical reasons to view themselves as morally superior, more righteous than others. That is exactly what you are doing by making up this standard. If it's not found in the Bible, Christians can't do it. Because he did eventually say that reasoning
watching
is clear.
TV is pagan. You need to get off of this now. Get off the internet. The internet is pagan. It's not in the Bible. Get off. You can't be here. It's not in the Bible.
Correct.
If you do this, it is pagan, because there are pagans who are online and it's not mentioned in the Bible. You need to get off now.
He says, if it's not mentioned in the Bible, right, it's not from God, then it must be pagan. If it's not mentioned in the Bible, it's not from God, it must be pagan. The internet is not mentioned in the Bible. You are participating in pagan practices by being here on YouTube right now. Repent, repent, you heretic. You are being very pagan. You are worshiping false gods of the internet. Get off the internet now. Or admit that you need a real standard to judge whether something is pagan or not. Simply not being mentioned in the Bible doesn't make something pagan. And again, Easter is mentioned in the Bible. Easter is the celebration of Jesus' resurrection. That's mentioned in the Bible. Yes, the word Easter, an English word, doesn't exist in there. Big whoop-de-doo. That's not evidence. Yes, bunnies aren't mentioned there. You know what else isn't mentioned? The internet, cars, TV, spaceships, all kinds of things. Probably 99% of everything that exists in the world is not mentioned in the Bible. That doesn't mean it's pagan. And if you don't like bunnies, don't celebrate bunnies. Or don't have a bunny at your Easter event. I don't have a bunny at mine. But that doesn't mean that Easter is pagan just because a symbol of the spring came associated with Easter, which occurs in the spring. Real geniuses here. Real geniuses. And Alan, this channel is not, he says, are you Catholics? This channel is neither Protestant nor Catholic. It is simply Christian. And Ask says, you apostates are full of yourselves.
No, he's an apostate
Amazing that
according
this guy who
to
comes in here
Paul.
and is full of himself about how righteous he is because he doesn't make Easter eggs, tells others they are full of themselves. This guy is here declaring his own righteousness, calling others bad Christians because they might decorate an egg, and he has the nerve to say others are full of themselves. Amazing. Amazing how blind this kind of nonsense makes someone.
So, doesn't say use both nostrils while breathing, so using both nostrils is pagan. I like that. I have some requests in the chat to make sure that you drop the part that covers the screen while I'm actually talking about it. So.
Yeah, so asks to time me out and spill your guts. I haven't timed you out. And
That
guess
was,
what? You want to call in? You want to call in and talk to us? You think I'm a coward? You think I'm a coward, Mr. Ask? You call in, you talk to us right now. If you're so big on being... No, I will not calm down. You are calling 99% of Christians to be heretics because they have an Easter egg. You are being a Pharisee. You're being the exact people that Jesus attacked. So no, I'm not going to calm down. You are being a disgusting, perverted loser. Okay? You calm down.
You were timed out by Jesus Spot, not by either one of us. So he just got tired of your antics. So you need to be quiet and sit
he's
down
on topic. So Jesus Bot, don't time out people or delete comments that are on topic. He is on topic, as ridiculous as he is.
Yeah, well, he was just like throwing insults, which was fine, But anyway, let's go and talk about this one source for the supposed the goddesses Rheda and Eostre. Now, if they are, I should ignore, if either Rheda or Eostre are deity names, they would be weird exceptions to the calendar naming scheme. I want you to look at this again. Notice 2 of them are supposed to be goddess names. Nothing else refers to a god, including the months that do reference holidays and religious activities to the most important gods. So why would these otherwise unattested, for you very low IQ people like Ask in the chat who don't know what unattested means, that means that there is no written reference to them at all whatsoever, no picture of them, nothing, no reference to these figures other than this one sentence in bead. So these guys, if they are goddesses, they are so insignificant that they are not remembered in any other way by anyone else in any place at any time. But Bede thinks that the months are named after goddesses or something. That would be really, really weird. Now, we don't find it anywhere, you don't find these anywhere else through when you do find god names in all kinds of other places. You find god names of the Germanic pagan gods in inscriptions. I mean, in the days of our week, for heaven's sakes. In legends, in old poetry that are surviving, gotten written down later, references made by contemporary foreign historians, because during the pagan era, they were illiterate. So their contemporaries who made records were pagans, or excuse me, were foreigners. And then locally, later historians who were from that culture, but a couple hundred years removed, but they still had access potentially to lost materials. No, none of these people reference it. There are no theophanic names, shaman names, with these particles. So a theophanic name is, for example, Strength of Thor or something, Woden's Gift, whatever. So there are no theophanic human names with these articles. There are also no place names. I have searched every database of Anglo-Saxon place names that I could find. I did not locate one name in which there is a plausible reference to a goddess Eostre. There are a very few places that have roots that are also from the root from which Eostre comes, but Eostre means eastern or easterly or whatever. And in context, there was not a single example of a place that you would expect to be a God reference rather than a directional reference. For example, a lot of places with affixes of woods or hills or groves referred to pagan deities. You know, you'd have Woden's Grove or Woden's Hill in different words. And so if I found a place that said Eostre Hill or Eostre Grove, I would be very likely to believe that is very likely to be a reference to a goddess, because that is a structure of a name that's associated with gods. If it's just Eostre town, you would expect it to be the eastern town. And there are very, very few places that even have that eastern element in it. There is one person with a personal name with that particle, and it's like a Easter friend. And that's a late devout Christian month who would have been named after the Christian holiday. It was already well established as a name. He was not a pagan. It is the only name that has this particle. So the supposed Germanic goddess Eostre, we need evidence for her existing. If neither one of these are deity names, and there isn't any better evidence for Rheda either, if they are deity names, the related months ought to have important religious festivals. However, the months of important festivals are Holy Month, Blood Month, named after blood sacrifices, by the way, and Cake Month, where you made cakes to, I think, female deities. There are bonus minor festivals of the Mother's Night. There was a Mother's Night cult. The mothers are not human mothers. They are like matron figures, goddesses. And there was a feast during Yule that was associated with boar hunting and oath making over drinks. And then there were some minor rites during Winterfloth. Now, Eostre month and even Rheda month, they're almost unusually devoid of any kind of religious activity that are recorded not just in Anglo-Saxon sources, but in Germanic sources and even in Nordic sources. In Nordic sources, some of these month names are the same. Like Holy Month, Blood Month, and Cake Month have the same names in the Nordic sources that share mainly the same religion. Easter month does not. It does not have the same name. It's one of the months, like Three Milking Month had a different name in those places because it wasn't as important to the heritage. The common Proto-Germanic heritage did not consider them nearly as important. The main Nordic gods had direct parallels in Anglo-Saxon and Germanic histories. They were the same gods, yet this supposed Eostre does not exist in this system. It seems a lot more likely that Bede just assumed that he could assign a Roman-type deity association to months without an obvious etymology. January and March are both absolutely named after gods, and April, May, and June may also be, the goddesses may be named younger and older, and the two months may be named after younger and older and not directly after the goddesses. That's why there's some question, and April may or may not be named after a god. So now this idea that there was a pagan goddess really got popularized by Jacob Grimm. Nobody before him really considered it. He used Bede's Eostre month to invent an entire goddess. He connected Eostre linguistically to the dawn, which is legitimate if you go back far enough. But then he posited this pan-Indo-European dawn goddess that he called Ostara. He's like, there's this Ostara, and all these Indo-Europeans worshipped this Ostara continuously until the Christianization of the Christian tribes. He just made this up. There's no idea of any dawn goddess that we know of in Germanic or even Nordic legends. They don't exist. He argued vacuously that to deny Eostre, that Eostre was a goddess, was to call Bede a liar, and that's nonsense. No, Bede just made his best guess, or he may have reported what some old guy told him when he asked. I don't know. I guess she was a goddess or something like that. He just reported the best that he knew. He was recording an oral tradition for posterity. He was not expounding a dogmatic theology. Just because he said it doesn't mean that he had any evidence for believing that. He's repeating what is his knowledge, what he thinks it is. So the question is, how could a goddess so important, two goddesses so important that entire months are named after them, they leave no linguistic trace of any worship whatsoever? There's not an image of them, a reference to them, anything. They do not exist. There is no reference to any kind of activity associated with an Eostre. Does not exist.
All right, so this will probably be the last time that we address Mr. Ask here. He says, you goons are one-sided like Muslims. No wonder they drill your Trinitarian doctrine. So he has confirmed he is not a Christian. So just so anyone watching this later realizes, Ask is not a Christian in any sense of the term. He denies Christ. He says that Christ is just a man and probably didn't do anything for him. He has to follow the law. He has to be righteous on his own accord in order for him to achieve salvation. Then he said, all Trinitarians are like you, stubborn, prideful, and ill knowledge. Therefore, you turn to insults. So ironic. This genius came in here, insulted me more than a dozen times as I asked him for evidence. And then finally, after all that, I responded in kind. You know what? It seems that I have been proven correct here. I did not know you were a Unitarian. I did not know that you were denying Christ, but I knew that your behavior was denying Christ. Like I didn't know doctrinally you denied Christ, but I knew your behavior was denying him, and your behavior has proven itself to be accurate to your theological beliefs. You don't believe in the deity of Christ. You don't believe in God. You believe in some other foreign deity. In fact, you are a pagan. You're not a Christian. By definition, you are a pagan who believes in a different deity. And you tell us that we're stubborn, prideful, and ill knowledge. I gave you the link to call in. I asked you for evidence multiple times. I asked you for an argument. I want to see evidence. You're the one who's being stubborn and prideful, who doesn't want to say anything. You said, oh yes, you said the evidence is the Bible, but you didn't follow that through. Just my evidence that we're celebrating Easter properly is the Bible. You see how that's not an argument? My evidence is church history. My evidence is facts, actual history. My evidence is everything in existence agrees with my position. You see how that's not an argument? We're looking at actual data. You're just sitting there in chat asserting yourself to be right by constantly throwing insults. Oh, wow, I said all what you're saying. What a liar. What? Stop judging, you fool. Stop judging, you fool. You are a snake in wolf's clothing. This is a guy who says that because I insulted him, I'm not a true Christian.
He's also especially special. You are a snake in wolf's clothing, so you look big and threatening, but instead you're a snake. Ask, sweetie. I know. Just because you aren't very intelligent doesn't mean that you have to be a pagan. You can be humble, okay? Now, intellectual arrogance is something that both very unintelligent and very intelligent people fall prey to. Intelligent people make up really good arguments that aren't true, but are hard to refute because they're good talkers. Unintelligent people think that they have a secret knowledge and that they're in possession of secret things that no one else has, and that their special knowledge allows them to know things that other people don't. So, yes, we ask a little bit more than the Bible. Your argument is that if the Bible does not describe it, you can't do it. And that would mean that you can't, because it's pagan, that would mean you can't be on the internet. No one is worshiping eggs.
You can't use toilet paper. Toilet paper's not in the Bible. I assume you walk around with shit on your ass because you can't use toilet paper. It's not described in the Bible, and various other things as well. I bet you that you just sit around all day living as a person from 3,000 years ago would live, because that's what is described in the Bible.
Electricity is pagan. Turn off your phone.
Mm-hmm.
It's pagan.
And all he keeps doing is saying, so many manifesting, follow the cult leader. This guy who's trying to recruit people to his Unitarian
to an actual
anti-Jesus
cult.
cult.
Yep. He is trying to cause you to apostate against the God who saved you and become an apostate and go to hell. He's tempting you to hell. It's like, oh, you're a cult leader. All right.
So, real quick. So,
Yep.
I know there's a delay, so I'm going to give him some time. But if asked, does not give a thorough argument for why Easter is pagan based on what the Bible says, then he will be permanently blocked on this channel, because I have no tolerance for Unitarian anti-God pagans. All right, Mary, you can continue your presentation while we give him some time to make his case.
So I want to keep in mind here that most of these people who are like, oh, Easter's pagan, they think that they have super secret special knowledge, that they know things that no one else does. But their own arguments show their utter lack of a grasp of linear history. That's why I reference the time-traveling uteruses, because in the Islamic tradition, very often you have people giving birth at impossible ages, and somehow they're giving birth at a time whenever their kid is already supposed to be like 10 or 15 years old, or they're already 60 or something. So I make a joke that they're time-traveling uteruses because the Islamic sources are so corrupted, they have a hard time with linear time. This is what happens when people make up their conspiracy theories and are just inventing things because they sound nice. Very often, these theories don't work with linear time. And this is one of the ones that doesn't work with linear time. What happened before has to happen before the things that happen after. And these arguments involve things not following befores and afters, as well as completely off the wall word associations, and then total wild assertions of things that just aren't true. There is a goddess Eostre who is associated with rabbits and chickens and eggs. Show me one source for the goddess, supposed goddess Eostre, even having existed, other than Bede's one throwaway line that a month in which, because it was a lunar month, after the lunar months got corrected and were no longer they no longer had the intercalary months shoved in to keep it from getting too off track. When it lined up again to, when they were lined up to the Roman months, it happened to be the month in which the Resurrection Sunday always fell. Show any connection other than that there was a goddess named Eostre at all in any source whatsoever, other than Bede's one throwaway line about the name of the month coming from the name of a goddess, and show any evidence of any goddess in the Germanic tradition associated with rabbits, and I'll even give you hares. Rabbits or hares. Any Germanic goddess. Any single line. Any image of a half human, half rabbit goddess, for instance. Any image of a goddess holding a rabbit in the Germanic tradition. Any literary reference to any such goddess of any name. Please, please give me that. Why can't you get that? Because it doesn't exist. Because it was made up. It was made up to sucker in gullible, foolish people who are easily misled to the destruction of their souls. They bait you in with this, oh, did you know about this? And you're like, wow, I didn't know about this. You didn't know about it because it isn't true. But they bait you in with this nonsense, and then they tell you other things that are untrue, things that will cause your denial of Christ. To believe these things is to deny Christ. And all of these weird culty pagany groups At their fundamental core, what they want is your apostasy. If you begin to follow them, you will usually end up in apostasy. That's why this is important. I don't need you to decide to do Easter egg hunts or not. I don't care. I don't care if that's how you spend your Easter afternoon or not. Do not care. Easter was a feast day. It was a day of celebration, which was spent first in the church and afterwards in eating and having fun and games. And guess what everybody had lying around at that time? They had a whole bunch of eggs lying around. Why did they have eggs lying around, boys and girls? I'm sure that our actual chat knows. Why did folks have eggs lying around? It'll be a month or be a minute before they know, so I'll go ahead and answer before their answers start popping up, but I'm sure they will before I get there.
Well, before
Reason
you
is
do,
because
but
what?
hold on. Before you give your answer, I
Mhm.
got to give the answer that would be consistent with anti-Easter themes, right? The reason they had eggs lying around is because they were bowing down and worshiping those eggs, because the egg is the source of life. So they saw the egg as a type of deity and were worshiping it. Correct?
And that would be 100, 1,000, 9,000% completely wrong and totally made up and pulled out somebody's butt. The reason that they had eggs lying around is because, excellent, Marion, she got it first, is because of fasting. During fasting period, during Lent, you cannot eat animal products. So you can't have milk, you can't have eggs. So right before Lent began, people would have a few days when they ate up every bit of dairy and eggs that were lying around. Now, in the far north, because of when cattle were born, usually you'd be drying off your animals right before then, so that then they could give birth having had a dry period, and so be better able to give you milk later on. So you don't have a lot of milk building up. So you don't have tons and tons of cheese that you've had to make during this time. But you do, your chickens keep laying eggs. And they may or may not be broody yet. So you may or may not be leaving your chicken to sit on their eggs and then have one big batch of chicks that you raise till you eat them. So that may or may not be happening at this time. If they're not broody at that time, then you continue to take their eggs, and you can keep eggs unwashed, unrefrigerated for a decent amount of time. But you also need to boil the ones at the beginning of the 40-day period, because after 40 days, it's a pretty good chance they won't be good anymore. So one way or another, you have a ton of eggs lying around. You have boiled eggs and you have fresh eggs that you haven't been able to eat all this time. You've been saving them. Today is a feast day. You have meat, you have eggs that you've been saving up, and also you have a huge number of teenagers running around having fun because it's a feast day and you're supposed to be joyous and enjoying things, and also having access to a lot of eggs. So in different areas, all kinds of egg traditions existed. The two main traditions were assaulting people with buckets of water, which spontaneously occurred in various times because things aren't quite frozen anymore, but it's still cold. So, you go after the opposite sex with a bucket of water and just try to get them if you're a young person, because that's what teenagers do, right? Or you give people eggs if it's sweeter, or you throw eggs at the opposite sex if you're not so sweet in your particular town. Lots of different egg things came around. Also, masters would give eggs to their servants at the end of the fast day. Like, oh, it's the end of fast. Everyone, it's a feast. Let's all eat. And here, have some eggs. It was a generous activity that people did because they had a lot of eggs on hand. That is why the egg stuff started. Now, the tradition of dyeing eggs is associated with priests having had all these eggs lying around, using eggs as a symbol for Christ, saying that, hey, this egg that hasn't been boiled, it looks dead as Christ's tomb did. And it looks inviolate, meaning that it looks like nothing's happened inside of it. It looks whole and contained, right? But really inside of this whole inviolate egg there is life. And that is a symbol, of the developing chick. It's a symbol of life from something that appears dead. So it was taken as a symbol of resurrection. And as a result, eggs became commonly dyed in red, which was the symbolic color associated with Christ and his passion. That means his suffering, death, etc. And so part of giving eggs, they were often red. And a lot of early reference to decorated eggs were red or gold, being royalty or Christ's suffering. So I like that. Estrogen is pagan. Who knew?
So real quick here, Dr. Murky Brain, who I don't really think is a Muslim, but he claims to be a Muslim. We'll see if he's logically consistent, right? He says, because we have an ancient source that tells us a word is pagan. Well, first of all, he doesn't tell you the word is pagan because he's not stupid like you. He doesn't think that a word can be pagan or not pagan. But because it was used, allegedly, a Germanic, a German word that's sort of similar to an English word was used, then therefore it's pagan. So my criteria for him, since he claims to be a Muslim, is that is Allah pagan? Because we know 100% factual that the term Allah was used by pagans to describe their deity. There is zero doubt about that. So by his logic, if a pagan has used that term is forever disgraced, can't be used to describe anything true. Therefore, Allah is pagan. So he either has to admit Allah is pagan, or he has to admit that his own criteria is stupid.
All right. So
what do you? So Rose says, "Here we go. I'm not allowed to talk to this." What do you mean you're not allowed to talk to me? I mean, this isn't a conversation between you and I. You're allowed to talk in the chat, just like everyone else. Anyway, go ahead.
all right. So anyway, that's where eggs actually came from in Christian celebrations. They were just hanging around. They were good for use as a metaphor by local priests. We don't know who the first priest was to use that metaphor. Apparently, it was just a really common metaphor. And if you had a whole stack of eggs kind of on your table for weeks, that would be something that would occur to a lot of people as a metaphor. It's just not that obscure, right? And so, yeah, that's where it comes from in Christianity, and that and the high spirits of teenagers who have no chores for the day and are allowed to get up into hijinks and invent games developed most of this. I mean, like the egg rolling. That was invented by 13-year-old boys, quite clearly. Like, that's the sort of thing boys invent, right? Can you imagine what kind of pagan pagan celebration would be associated with egg rolling? It's like the cheese rolling. I don't know why Brits love rolling things, but Brits love rolling things down hills. There's nothing pagan about cheese rolling either, and they do that too because it's something that young boys make up, right? They have time off. It's a day of
Maybe some
joy.
clarification here, right? So what on what actually makes something pagan? And what the sense we're using here, and that would be if it's involved in the worship as an object of worship in a polytheistic, non-Christian religious environment, and it has that meaning to the person who is using it.
Right.
So could an egg be pagan, right? Could an egg be pagan? Sure, an egg could be. There was probably some culture somewhere that had some kind of worship service that involved eggs. But does that mean it's pagan for everyone of all time? Well, of course not. It has to have that meaning to the person who is using the egg. If I eat an egg, that doesn't make it pagan, right? If I cut down a tree, that doesn't mean that I'm committing a pagan act, even if pagans cut down trees to make idols out of them.
Or an anti-pagan act, because the monks cut down sacred trees whenever people would say, oh, we'll follow you, but we worship this tree, it's super powerful and it defends us. And he's like, well, if I chop it down, Like, and nothing happens to me. What'd you say? Like, well, then would say it's false or whatever, that kind of thing. Like, when I chop down a tree, I'm not doing something anti-pagan either. I'm just cutting down a tree. I have other reason for doing it. And by the way, in Chinese culture, the presentation of red eggs to people is what you do whenever you give birth to a son traditionally, because sons were good and women were trash in that culture anciently. And so you would celebrate that with red eggs. Total coincidence. Does not have a common source at all. China was an incredibly meat-impoverished society as a whole. So having something that is animal-based was considered wonderful. And red was the lucky color. So it was, and it's also a nice, convenient shape to give people. So you'd give people the red eggs for celebrating the birth of a son. So yeah, Humpty Dumpty was Pagan. And that isn't religious either. I mean, it was considered, I guess, lucky in sort of a vague way, but it wasn't in the act of, like, you were giving people something that was a good fortune thing. So I guess it was superstitious, but it wasn't specifically religious. It was not involved in invoking magical powers or anything else even. So, all right.
So, so King Drac just came in, a couple others just came in, asked similar questions, asking if this was a joke or something along those lines. He says, how can you accidentally worship the wrong God? You can't, right? Worship is an intentional act. So let's say that you did something that actually, now granted, nothing in Easter, right? None of the Easter customs have any religious significance, pagan religious significance. But let's say you accidentally did something that was actually religiously significant to a demonic cult, i.e. a false religion. Would that mean you're worshiping their God? No. I mean, you just happen to do the same things that they do in worship. That doesn't mean you're worshiping their God. It means you coincidentally did the same things. You can't accidentally worship something. You can't accidentally worship anything. You can only intentionally worship.
All right, so we're gonna get on to move further into the topic and into some details. Alan asked some good questions. I think he's really listening now. I'm glad that you're listening. I get upset about this because people are usually using these things to tell you that they have secrets. And so you need to listen to them, and all these other things that you've never heard before, you need to follow them. They know the truth. And they're usually going to lead you into really bad directions. So I'll cover everything else in a moment. I'll keep going. So now I noted that Easter month and even Red month are almost unusually devoid of religious activity. There don't seem to be anything religious happening at this time, when there are lots of little pagan festivals happening at different times. And remember, whenever I did the whole Christmas series, I covered a lot about I actually read a ton about pagan festivals throughout the year of all the Nordic folks too. So this is pan-Germanic, not just the subgroup of Anglo-Saxon / German today, small group. It's all of them. There are very, very, very few religious activities happening at this time, this time period during the year. It's really after Cake Month and the Cake Festival. There really isn't anything for a while. So anyway, he claimed that there was this pan-Indo-European goddess named Ostara. There's no evidence for that. There's no evidence. So another really important point is that he was just wrong about Eostre meaning dawn. Grimm was wrong. So he has been disputed since the 1860s. Like, the first people who were like, and Grimm's from the 1800s, and right after he put that out, other people were like, yeah, I don't think so, Grimm. You're smoking something now. More recently, Shaw, a researcher named Shaw, P.A. Shaw, he showed convincingly that Old English uses this Eostre, whatever, exclusively as an adverb and never as a noun. So if you go all the way back to Indo-European, so from Indo-European you get Iranian and Greek and Hindi and Celtic and Germanic languages. If you go all the way back here, then a common root that gave us East also gives us dawn in a lot of these languages. By the time you get to Old English, that dawn meaning is gone. It does not exist in Old English. There is no meaning of dawn in any of these this East word particle. It doesn't ever mean dawn. So there's also the fact that it only means eastern or easterly. There's also the fact that in every month the sun dawns. And so one would expect the name like an early dawn month or something like that if it's referring to the dawn finally being the same length, the day being the same length as a night. You might use a word like that to refer to it. But just saying dawn month doesn't actually make much sense. Like, it doesn't give any meaning. Every month has dawn. Easterly month actually makes immediate sense. Spelled that wrong. Because on that day of the spring equinox, only the sun rises to the due east and sets to the due west. And because these folks were the Germanic folks, they were celestial navigators. They have a day called nice sailing, the nice sailing month 1, nice sailing month 2, like good for sailing months, was their names for summer. So they were navigators, they were celestial navigators. So they would have noticed that in this month, the sun finally rises exactly to due east. So naming it East month or Easterly month, Eastern month, would make sense, whereas dawn month actually doesn't even make sense. So this is further suggested by the parallel solstices and the otherwise missing equinox parallels. So in this calendar for the solstices, you have former Yule and latter Yule. You have former Litha and latter Litha. So you have this former and latter after that center on the solstice. So they're parallel to one another. Then on the first month after the equinox, you have a name that specifically refers to the fact that it's the start of winter. It's the start after the equinox. And the word is winter fulling or winter waxing, basically the starting of winter. If it's named after a goddess, you do not have that parallel over in spring. If it's named after the sun rising in the due east, then you do have that parallel in meaning with Eostre Monath. You would have that meaning. Now, it's also significant when the intercalary day or month is shoved in. So an intercalary month is an extra month that you have to have whenever you have a strictly linear calendar. Your year is shorter than the actual year. And unless you're Mohammed and get offended at sticking in extra months periodically to keep everything lined up so your month names actually make sense and refer to times of year still, as long as you don't get offended by that, you have to have a system for shoving in an extra month. And the name Easterly month gives the answers to how you know when to shove in the extra month. If the sun fails to rise in the due east during Easterly month, that means you need to shove in an extra month. And that's what they did during the summer. You got a bonus summer month and you get 3 months of Litha if this, if this was not observed, if people realized that they were off by a full month or just about to get off by a full month, and that like the sun isn't rising in the due east during this month, we got to shove in an extra month or our year is going to get super off and things won't line up anymore. So because you need to pay attention to where the sun rises at an equinox to know this, it all works out. It makes sense. And it's simple and easy for people of their technology to do. The pattern in etymology both exclude a goddess association, except by the most obscure, coincidental, and tangential connection. That what I'm saying is that it is called Easterly month because that's when the sun should rise due east. If there happened to be an incredibly obscure goddess named Eostre, even that would be coincidental. The month is almost certainly, like 99.99999% certain, that it was never named after a pagan goddess of this name. It does not make sense because you can't have a pagan goddess of the dawn. You know, the assumption is that she must be a pagan goddess of the dawn, if that's not even a name for the dawn. Okay, so.
All right. So I just wanted to highlight this comment. Bunch of nonsense. Easter is not from Ishtar. You all are ignorant. Unsubscribing. Maybe you should listen to something being said before jumping to conclusions. We're literally making fun of this nonsense idea. I mean, have you never watched anything that I do on this channel? We make fun of stuff all the time. And yeah, I phrased the title as a positive. Don't accidentally worship the wrong God, to make fun of this ridiculous idea. Whatever. Hey, you want to unsubscribe because you don't want to bother to listen to what's being said? Feel free. Feel free.
And I did because I'm not doing makeup today. So just so you know, don't feel like doing makeup today.
And I did put Dr. M in timeout for 24 hours because he refused to provide any argument. He refused to answer my question about Allah being pagan and so on and so forth. I've given him the opportunity to call in. He has called in before. I know he is capable, but he won't because he's scared. And to be perfectly honest, I'm almost certain that he is just a pure troll. He only comes into these chats and says utter nonsense he doesn't believe himself because he enjoys getting a rise out of people.
He's super useful because it's hilarious because, you know, I'm a few minutes behind. So as I am saying that a Muslim will say this stupid thing, he almost always puts that stupid thing in the chat. So he's very useful. Very useful.
Yeah. And Alan, I actually agree 100%. Christians need to get their sources and facts straight, which is what we're attempting to do here. And we're giving people who disagree the opportunity to provide different sources.
Yeah, and by the way, Shaw is just, he's a historian, linguist, something like that. He is absolutely not involved in anything religious. He's in the Bristol Classical Press, right? So he's just like, this is silly, grim. Why did you make this argument? It's goofy. Now, keep in mind that the old English word dawn was linguistically connected to our modern word dawn. It's dagung, from which we get dawn. And it comes from dayun, which is like daying. It's becoming day, okay? So, and that's from Proto-Germanic, the Proto-Germanic word for day, which also yielded Tagen, like Guten Tag, Tagen, to dawn in Germanic. So that means that if you go back to Proto-Germanic, it already doesn't, the Eostre does not have a dawn-related meaning in Proto-Germanic, from which the Nordic, English, and Germanic or associated languages, all of those languages came from that family tree. It had already lost this dawn meaning. So the Anglo-Saxon term Eostre month is exceedingly unlikely to mean dawn month, and it also means that a Germanic goddess of the dawn is exceedingly unlikely to have maintained some kind of name far removed from the meaning of her name. She would have gotten a new name associated with it, almost certainly. And what is an Easterly goddess? It doesn't make any sense. We don't have a goddess of the north, a goddess of the south, a goddess of the east, a goddess of the west in any Germanic, Nordic, or even Indo-European system. They don't exist. like a god of the four winds exists, but cardinal directions do not have gods associated with them in these pagan systems. They don't exist. So the idea that there
hold
is
on
a
a minute,
goddess with
Ari.
this name is really unlikely.
Okay, you already said it was really unlikely. Darn it, you already got there. I was going to stop you and say, well, in honor of Dr. M, this is an argument of silence, Mary, just because there weren't any east, west, or north, south gods doesn't mean that there couldn't be an Easter god in this, a Eastern god in this language. But yes, the point is, right, if you're going to have a god of the East, then you're probably going to have gods of other directions as well. And that would be really, really strange. So with arguments of silence, you need to evaluate them for what the probability is. Just because you say, if you'd expect something to exist and it doesn't exist, then that is actually a good argument. But if you say we have no evidence of this and it's not something you would expect to see direct evidence of, then that's not a good argument. So you have to evaluate it based on what you'd expect. And what you would expect is if you have an Eastern god, which is plausible, right? That's certainly something that a religion could have, is gods of the cardinal directions. Well, then you'd expect there to be other cardinal directions as well. At minimum, west, right? I mean, you gotta at least have the opposite.
Yeah. All right, so now let's pretend for a moment. Let's just pretend that Eostre month actually does mean dawn month. And by the way, the entire argument is that this is a dawn goddess. No one has ever argued that there is an Eastern goddess, right? So let's just pretend that Eostre month or Monath or Eostre Monath actually does mean dawn month. Let us pretend for a moment that there is a goddess named Dawn or Eostre. Now here's the next question. Would that goddess be a fertility goddess? Because remember that this is required in their idea, that the whole thing is wrapped up in the idea of this fertility goddess named Eostre. And the answer is no. Dawn goddesses are celestial messengers in Indo-European tradition. So we have 3 examples of Indo-European tradition. And then we have in Baltic mythology, they have other elements that is non-Indo-European. So let's start without even though the Baltic languages are Indo-European, they were people who were influenced heavily by pre-existing folks who weren't Indo-European and adopted a different religious system in some ways. Just like Aphrodite was adopted from the East as Ishtar. Ishtar is Aphrodite. They actually are the same person. All right. So, but in the Indo-European system, the Greek Eos rides in a chariot, is a female, and she announces the coming of the day before her brother Helios. She is not associated with Aphrodite, who is the goddess of love and the goddess of Venus. So in the native Indo-European system, you have a dawn goddess who is a messenger and has no Venus trappings and no love trappings. The Roman Aurora does the same thing. Her ancestry is more variable, though. She's not always the brother of Helios or of Apollo or whoever, right? She is not associated with Venus, who is the goddess of love in that system too, again, borrowed from the East and outside the Indo-European system. In Vedic Hinduism, Usha, who is a dawn goddess, she is the most important of the goddesses in these very early hymns. Though she's much less important than the 3 male main deities, Agni, the god of fire, Soma, the god of the food of the gods, and Indra, who's like the main sky father figure. She is also the sun announcer for the male sun god, who is either her husband or son, and her sister is night. Venus in this system is male and named Shukra, and is the god of beauty, luxury, and wealth, not of love. Baltic mythology shows non-Indo-European.
What a powerful answer.
Sorry, that was an accident.
Oops. So And this one, dawning, is another name for the dawn star. So the words fourth dawning refer to Venus. So in this Baltic mythology, when they have a goddess of dawn, they mean the morning star goddess is what they're saying. She's not a dawn deity proper, but she takes the messenger of the sun role rather than kind of traditional Venusian love role in the Eastern sense. She is a messenger of the sun because the Venus, the star, is the morning star seen before the rising of the sun, is the last glimmering star, etc. She's the herald of the day, sort of thing. The moon in this one is a male and cheats on his wife, the sun, with the star, but she continues in her role as sun announcer. And in Latvia, it's basically the same thing, except now Venus, this Venus figure is male and is the bridegroom to the daughter of the sun, and the sun is also female again. So there's a sex swap, and neither one of them have the full love associations that come from the Middle East, right?
So before we go on, Woody asked, did she just set a messenger, like clear message? So Mary, you seem to be associating the Muhammad with these dawn goddesses, which, that sounds a bit cringy to me.
No problem. It's fine for it to be cringy.
Yeah. I mean, that is the kind of wild association that you take at this time. Oh, it's a messenger of the sun. Muhammad's a messenger of his God, so they're the same. Like, this is the kind of chains of logic that is kind of occurring here to try to make these things connect. Now, there
so just
are
real
a
quick,
lot. Yeah.
just real quick, Mark Fish says Eostre is pronounced Eostre. Heard it pronounced
Yeah.
all kinds of different ways. I don't know
It
what is the
probably
correct
is.
pronunciation. And frankly,
Yeah.
probably no one really does for sure, since it would be a word that was in use in the 3rd century. We don't know exactly how they would have pronounced it. So anyone's
Well,
guess.
seventh or 8th century, 7th and 8th century. But yeah, it probably is, because os is the original, or hos, or something like that is the original first syllable in Indo-European. So yeah,
Yeah,
it
and then
probably is
just one other comment
something like
here.
that. Does it become e? So, but whatever. I'll just keep saying it the same way, even if I'm mispronouncing it.
Yeah. So just one other quick comment. Una says, nice new clip. I don't know if she's referring to the answer one, which I didn't intend to play. I accidentally clicked that while I was looking for the cringy one. But I have, like, I don't know, 20, 30 clips on here that I have never played that I added very recently. So stay tuned for lots of new funny Muslim sayings. Back to you, Mary.
Yeah, he was so amused by that he just was like, this is hilarious, because he says silly things. All right. So Eostre, or Eostre, being the Sumerian or Babylonian goddess Ishtar, is a very common assertion. And that is completely false. Easter sounds sort of like Ishtar in English, in modern English. And the farther back you go, the less it even sounds like it. And this really is kind of a jackpot on stupidity. Here's the image that usually goes along with that. The Canaanite form of Ishtar actually was Ashtart, or Astarte, or Atart, which is Venus. So the idea that Astarte is a Phoenician in Greek, and Ashtaroth is like Canaanite or something like that. No, Phoenicians were a subset of Canaanites. They spoke extraordinarily closely related languages and basically had the same names for them. Ashtaroth has an added syllable to make the name an insult in Hebrew. Ashtart, the abomination, or Ashtart, the enormity. It is the idea of it being an enormity in the sense of a sinful enormity, right?
So stopping you real quick. You said jackpot of stupidity. I think we need to make that a channel meme. So everyone, it's your instructions. Say jackpot of stupidity every time you can going forward. All right, back to you.
And so Whenever you go into Greek, you lose the SH sound because they don't have it, and it becomes Astarte in Greek. But that doesn't make her a Greek goddess now that she's Astarte. Whatever the Greeks are talking about Astarte, they're talking about the Phoenician goddess. Whenever this figure was borrowed into the Greek pantheon, she was borrowed as Aphrodite, not as Astarte. Whenever they say Astarte, they mean the original one, and Aphrodite, they mean the goddess that we borrowed and think is ours now. So Eostre means easterly. It comes from a root meaning of dawn in the Proto-Indo-European language, right? In the early Proto-Indo-European language. While Ishtar is a name of Semitic derivation. The Proto-Indo-European language and the Proto-Semitic language are not related to one another. So anything that sounds the same is a total coincidence. You have to have had a borrowing at some point for there to be a relationship. They don't have a common root. They are separate languages. So Ishtar was the name that the Semites applied to the Sumerian goddess who had the name Inanna. And Inanna, all of the traits of Ishtar came from and were imported from the Sumerian Inanna. And Inanna was the most important goddess in the Sumerian system, and she was a goddess of love and war, and she was Venusian, so she was a Venus goddess. But the Semites had natively identified Venus as male, as Atar. And the god Atar you can still find in ancient South Arabian inscriptions and even other places in the West Semitic universe. Their surviving native deity was a male Venus. The feminine version, the name was feminized and then applied to Inanna, and then this figure was the old Inanna figure with a new Semitic name. Okay, and then from becoming Ishtar with the name, she was then exported into Greece and into the northern ancient Near East and to other areas in those places. And in Greece, she was Aphrodite. Now, Aphrodite, thus, is an import. She is not natively from the Indo-European pantheon. She's just taken and inserted in and got extra little bits that applied to her, but she is a foreign goddess who was adopted and brought in. She is distinctly Venusian too. She has traits from Ishtar, minus some of the war bits, but guess what? Like, her husband is Vulcan, right? Who was a smith god and therefore has war characteristics. So you have these war characteristics that still cling to Aphrodite in the Greek system. But she's no longer the primary goddess of war. And she is not Eos, the god goddess. So Aphrodite never got syncretized with Eos. They were never confused. They were never brought together. Eos was natively, the dawn goddess was natively from the Indo-European. Aphrodite was the introduction, and she is natively Ishtar. She's from the ancient Near East, and she has all of those characteristics. Now, Aphrodite, in turn, influenced the Roman Venus. Totally different name, but like the word Venus is in no way associated with Ishtar. Aphrodite, which actually is linguistically connected to through various borrowings to Ishtar. But basically, the Roman Venus got all the characteristics of the Greek figure, who was in turn imported from the East. None of this ever came north into the Nordic systems, into the Germanic systems, had no contact with that. Aphrodite, Astarte, Ishtar, etc., they have no linguistic or conceptual link to Eostre or even to Indo-European dawn goddesses. So the clear dawn goddesses of the Indo-European era, they were never influenced at all by this Ishtar figure, even conceptually. So there is no link. So really, you end up in an areophonic fallacy. This kind of argument that Ishtar sounds like Easter to me, so they're both the same pagan goddess. Is basically where this boils down to, and it's really at the same level as Jesus is the Son of God, and son, as in a child, sounds like sun, as in the sun in the sky. So Jesus is a pagan sun god. Like, it's this level of argumentation where it's things that just happen to sound a certain way in English, as if English were the language of the Bible or had some sort that this has some sort of influence on the meaning. And it's just not true.
So before you go on, two things. First, from Nicodemus, he just arrived, and maybe some clarifications necessary. He says, just getting here, we're talking about how ancient Greek paganism influenced others,
Well, how
which
it didn't influence. So how this Ishtar figure never had any influence whatsoever in the Germanic area. They actually did have female war figures, goddesses, in Germanic traditions, but it had nothing to do with any kind of Easterly type of goddess either. It's just completely separate figures, right?
yeah, which was his clarification of this comment, which was the first one. Greek bashing again, Uwe. I thought this was going to be pro-Christian Easter. Well, what it is pro-facts. We weren't bashing Greeks or anything along those lines. But I do find it strange, right, that you would say that, and you misunderstood what Mary was saying, but even if she was saying that, Greek pagan ideas influenced other pagan ideas, how that would be somehow anti-Christian. I mean, it's certainly factual that pagan in the systems with money gods and pantheons, a lot of them were quite open to adopting gods from other systems, and they influenced one another.
Oh yeah.
That's not an insult. That's just a statement of fact. So I'm not quite sure why you took this as an insult, but no, that's not our motive here. Our motive here is to get to the facts of the matter and see if there is any actual connection between these things.
Yeah.
When it says, go ahead.
Yeah, Aphrodite just isn't originally from an Indo-European religious system.
Yeah, exactly.
She's just an import, and that happened various times. Oh goodness, what's her name? Isis became a really influential import too. So
Una says, but if English wasn't in the Bible, does it mean our language is pagan? Yes, according to Ask, who is now banned from this channel. I think he would say that, or at least if he was being consistent. But Houston points out the ridiculousness of this in a different way. He says that Easter sounds like Esther. So apparently at Easter, we're celebrating Esther, the biblical figure.
yeah,
It's about as plausible, right?
just about. All right, so, and really at the foundation, these are ethnocentric errors, and it's really easy to be ethnocentric if you don't check yourself and pay attention. But all of these theories make the importance of Germanic peoples preeminent over everything. They exercise control over Roman history and are somehow front and center in the minds of the bishop of the churches in Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean. And that really is ridiculous and bigoted. And it might not be an intentional bigotry, but you're thinking that, oh, this is all about what these Germanic people happen to have their month named as, or even if they did have some sort of pagan fertility festival at this time, that somehow these people in faraway places who regarded these guys as barbarians and had no respect for them except for like the Romans had a respect for them as like the what is it called, the unspoiled primitive sort of thing. They kind of idealized them as the noble savage figure. They kind of invented the noble savage trope and applied that to the Germans and used it for social critique. But like, they didn't really respect them. Why on earth would they center the most important time in their religion around them, right? So
So apparently I need to retitle this stream because questions like this keep popping up. Just logged in. Can you tell me your position on Easter? Are you and Mary saying that the name Easter is derived from a pagan goddess or it isn't? Well, what we're doing is we're looking at the evidence and coming to the obvious conclusion that there is no relationship here. Maybe I need to add the word debunked to the title or something.
yeah, because too many people think we're serious. Like we post clickbait all the time, guys. We're super sarcastic.
Okay,
Say the
so
opposite
let me
constantly.
justify what I did, right? Why I titled the way I did, because it actually worked. And I titled it the way I did because I wanted people to tune in who believed this crazy idea, and force them to confront the evidence, which worked because we've had quite a number of people come in and support these ideas while we've been here. So that was my intention with titling it that way. But also, for those who actually know me, they should have read it as sarcastic mocking, because that's how I often title my streams, as sarcastic mocking of ridiculous positions.
Yeah. So and those who go, well, Easter itself is not a Christian name or something like that. So we can't. Sunday is not a Christian day. Monday is not a Christian name. Tuesday is not a Christian name. Wednesday is not a Christian name. Thursday is not a Christian name, and Friday is not a Christian name. Those are actually, even though the Roman ones were named after the planets and not directly after gods and goddesses, they actually were after literal planets. Our English ones are actually literally named after gods and goddesses, not after planets. So does that mean suddenly that we are pagans if we talk about going to church on Saturday or Sunday or Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday? You're like, do you become pagan because you use a word that was once pagan? If you celebrate the 4th of July, are you a member of the cult of Julius Caesar? Because you talk about the 4th of July, and Julius Caesar, after he died, had temples set up to his genius, meaning like his deified spirit. So are you now a pagan if you celebrate the 4th of July?
It is
No,
interesting.
you're not. No, it's just a word.
Yes, it's just a word, of course.
It's just a word, and it
But
doesn't
it is
even
actually
refer
really
to a
interesting,
goddess. And
Mary.
if it did, it wouldn't matter.
It is very interesting that the people who say this kind of thing, I've never heard someone say like, you should stop calling it Thursday. You should come up with a new term or something like that. They don't seem to have a problem with the days of the week or the months of the year being named after pagan things, but they have a problem with what turns out to be a false claim of the term Easter deriving from a pagan goddess.
Right. So, and then
I mean,
here,
I don't get it, right? I don't see what the difference is, right? If we shouldn't be honoring a pagan goddess by the month, or naming a celebration after, which didn't happen, right? Mary's proven didn't happen. But even if it did, then why are we honoring pagan gods and goddesses with our days and our months? Please explain why you're not up in arms about that and saying real Christians don't call it Thursday, they call it Fifth Day or something like that. Fourth day, but you know what I mean.
sorry, I was turning off to cough because I don't want to cough in your ears. So, anyway.
Yeah, sarcasm is an art. I don't know if I might not be good enough at it because people didn't understand that the title was sarcastic. I mean, you'd think from the ridiculous bunny image that people would guess that this was sarcastic, but maybe not.
Yep. Okay, so there we go.
And Houston has a valid point here. He does have a problem with the 10th month being called Oct, and then you could continue that for November, December as well.
Yep. All right. So here's another claim that you often hear, that Eostre, the goddess who didn't exist, She was associated with fertility and rabbits, which led to the Easter Bunny. So first of all, she's very unlikely to have existed. There's also no association of a hare, and it's important that's a hare because the first attestations for several hundred years before any rabbit was to a hare, to any Germanic fertility deity. Even if you extend it to rabbit, no association to any Germanic fertility deity. There's no association of early spring in Northern Europe to any type of fertility. That is, if Eostre was a fertility goddess, she is doing it wrong. There is nothing fertile and abundant about the very beginning of spring in Northern Europe. And I will explain more about this whenever we're talking about the whole idea that there is this association of Easter to a time of a Germanic fertility celebration period of any sort. All right. Now, Totem,
So
we are about to cover.
yeah,
We are about
yeah.
to cover
Oh, good. We're
rabbits.
about to cover.
I've already mentioned eggs in passing. We are covering rabbits right now. So,
So just to review, I would encourage you to watch the whole stream.
Yes, you should really watch the whole stream.
Yeah, but I want to point out something here, which applies in general to all of these claims, right? Just because there's association between two things doesn't automatically mean paganism, right? We did people did the same game with Christmas, and we had a stream on that in December and showed that none of these things have anything to do with it. It's like, let's take something that no one can deny, right? That what we picture as Santa Claus derives from a Coca-Cola ad, and especially the red color, right? Derives from Coca-Cola ad. Well, that means that it's some marketing scheme. Doesn't mean it's part of a pagan religion, right? So regardless of what the answer is, right, and Mary will get to the actual answer, but regardless of what the answer is, don't jump from, I don't know how this is biblical, to it must be stolen from a pagan religion. That's an unjustified leap.
Yes. And like, we don't do Santa Claus in my house because I'm sorry, guys, I won't lie to my kids. And I do think that that's important, but I don't think it's pagan, right? There's a difference. And I'm not against coloring a picture of Santa Claus because it's not pagan. It's a folklore figure. There are many folklore figures from Jack Frost to the Johnny Appleseed is a folklore figure, even though he's a real person who was, by the way, wanting to plant apple trees from seed to make Applejack out of, not for eating apples, which puts a whole nother spin on things. But anyway, we have folklore. Folklore is harmless until you make it an actual pagan something. I tell my, I read fairy tales to my kids. Doesn't make it pagan, right? All right. So,
yeah, and I'll just point out that that generally people who say this, and not saying any specific person because individuals vary, but generally people who say this will have no problem reading fiction, right? That is stories invented. They'll have no problem listening to music that has fictional lyrics. They'll have no problem with any pop cultural thing, except if it's associated with Christmas or Easter somehow, then it becomes, oh, you're worshiping false gods when you do this. It's very strange, right? Very, very strange that they are so obsessed with these details of these customs that they overlook everything they do every day of the year and declare themselves righteous because they don't follow that particular custom on that day. And no one has to follow the custom, right?
No,
you don't want to have a bunny, you don't want to have eggs, you don't want to have a Christmas tree, whatever. You don't have to. But don't say someone else is a pagan just because they follow a cultural custom that has nothing to do with worshiping some other deity.
So I mean, I think that we should have like more water fights on Easter afternoons. I think that's a great tradition, honestly. Lots of different areas spontaneously came up with that on their own, where I think it actually associates with Easter being a traditional day for baptism. So like after the baptisms were over, I guess kids started water fights. It's supposed to be joyous. And joy includes many things. It doesn't include just standing in church all day long, which no one did. They went off and had a feast and celebrated in joy, and I think that that's charming. There are things that are positive in things that are not directly symbolic, right? So, well, that is true that the red Santa comes from the Nass drawing, but
So
the Coke folks
right,
took
I put this
that
up.
drawing as their inspiration.
Right,
And
I put it up, right,
Yeah.
because it is a good clarification. What I should have said is that Coke made this popular. It's what
Right.
made it part of the pop culture.
Well, but they also modified the Thomas Nass drawing, but the artists were given the instructions that they needed to use Coke colors on their Santa, and they found that Santa, and they're like, hey, let's modify that. So, anyway, Osterhase is the Easter hare of Germany, and hares aren't rabbits. Now, why would hares be associated with Easter time? Well, early hare breeding season, early in the season, it's quite noticeable because male hares, they fight one another dramatically. There are a number of famous paintings of hares fighting. Let's see if I can find there are all kinds of paintings. They go out, you go outside, you see these hares jumping and whacking each other constantly. And so that really started, it marked the beginning of hare coursing season, which was hare hunting season. And so there's a phrase, if you've heard mad as a March hare, if you've read Alice in Wonderland, there's the Mad Hatter, and the March Hare is one of the figures because hares were considered to be kind of insane at this time because they're out fighting each other. And so there's Mad as the March Hare because early in this breeding season, as they're trying to secure the females, as our buddy
Yeah, I need to clip that and put that
Pikachu,
on the
yeah,
soundboard.
Pikachu. There you
It's
go.
not on the soundboard yet, so I can't play it, but
Yes.
I do plan to put that on the soundboard actually. Secure the females, because it doesn't sound like much until you know the context in which he's giving it. And he doesn't mean protect the females. He means take possession of the females so that you can breed with them. That's literally what he means.
Right. That's what he means. So as these hares are trying to secure the females, to Daniel's high level of approval, they go out and they fight, and they're super bold, and that makes them vulnerable to hare coursing, which is where you have dogs that go out and chase your hares, and then you catch them and eat them. And so it has no pagan associations for coursing hares at this time. Doesn't have any pagan associations in eating them. It was a common March April pastime. It's just what people did because the hares are out. Oh, look, they're out of hibernation, out of their burrows. They're not hiding away.
Who ate the apple?
They don't actually hibernate, but they do oh gosh, what's the word? Anyway, they're a lot less active in the winter. And so they have a whole lot fewer activities. And then suddenly they're available and they're easy to hunt, they're easy to find, and they're nice to eat at a time when you often don't have much meat. You've run out of your winter meat supplies. So someone made up a cute story in Protestant Germany in the 16th century that hares were out hiding Easter eggs. Very, very late 1500s was the first reference to this ever in writing. Because, Mom or Dad, what is that hare doing? Haha, they're out hiding the Easter eggs, because apparently they already had a tradition of hiding Easter eggs there. That was not a tradition in most places at the time. The tradition of hiding eggs also originates in Germany. Everywhere else, You would roll eggs in Britain because British people were obsessed with rolling things down hills for unknown reasons. You would give eggs to people. You would go around demanding eggs in some cultures, and you would throw eggs in other cultures. Like you'd have various egg themed activities, but hiding eggs was apparently originated in Germany for children to do, right? So apparently someone made up a story. Mom, what are the hares doing? Oh, they're hiding the eggs. Ha 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 ha. And so the phrase that was found in writing for the first time in the late 1500s was, "Do not worry if the hare escapes you. Should we miss his eggs, then we will cook the nest." Which that sounds horrible, but whatever. Because a hare has their children in their nest, but all right. Anyway, and as I mentioned before, hares became a focus of Easter because the eggs were boiled and saved all during the Lent, and they were not eaten. Hares aren't as cute as rabbits, so somehow these hares transformed magically into bunny rabbits in the U.S. in the 18th century, and they show up in England in the 19th century in the Victorian era. Apparently, just through cultural borrowing, there was heavy cultural borrowing across the Atlantic between the UK and the US in the 18th century. Any attempt to connect the Eostre hare to a pagan deity requires at minimum of a leap of roughly 1,000 years of silence, even if such a connection existed in pagan times. So, pretending for a moment that there was a pagan deity of something or other associated with hares in spring, recognized in the Germanic system, if that had existed, there would be 1,000 years in which there was nothing, and then suddenly this reappears again. It is, people don't time travel. They don't have psychic knowledge of traditions of the past. It is not possible for this to be pagan because there is no inheritance. There is no chain. There's no chain of transmission. It doesn't exist. It was spontaneously invented at this point. If it had existed, it still wouldn't be pagan because there is no inheritance. So really, people are making connections that aren't there. Despite the impossibility of linking a British custom to any Easter bunny before the 19th century, some fearless academics, and I use that in quotes, they have attempted to make much of Caesar's report that was taboo to eat hares in Britain. But Caesar also said it was taboo to eat chicken and geese. So where is the British chicken god? That is my question. If the conclusion from Caesar's report that was taboo to eat hares is that there was a god of hares, where is the chicken god? Where is the goose god? Where are they? Because they don't exist. None of them exist. They're in a thing, and Caesar might just be pulling stuff out of his backside too. Like, Caesar did not have that much contact with these folks. He was trying to kill them. He was not sitting down and having extended comparative cultural discussions with them. He was just reporting stuff that he thought was true. Yeah, he thought this was true. But hare bones were found in Celtic British middens, just not as commonly as elsewhere. Well, what elsewhere are we talking about? Oh, Celtic France and Germanic Germany. There were very commonly hare bones found in middens. And this is actually from the person who is attempting to make an argument, attempting to make this connection, who are Luke Murphy and Carly Amin, who are full of nonsense and should be ashamed of themselves. I cannot believe that. Oh, well, it's from Open Archaeology. That explains it. Any publication called Open This or Open That means that basically anything that you poop out, they'll publish. This is just shameful. Luke Murphy, Carly
while
Amin,
you're on this,
be ashamed.
and you might have this on a slide, but I wanted to bring it up because I read the Wikipedia article on this subject some time ago because I was, doing my own research unrelated to what Mary's saying today, and I just loved this particular line in it. Holtzman is the first to make this association between the Easter hare and Eostre, and he writes, in so doing, the Easter hare is inexplicable to me. So he says, I have no idea where this came from, but probably the hare is the sacred animal of Eostre, just as the hare is a statue of Abnoba. So he is the one who invents this idea. He literally invents the idea, and he says he doesn't know. He's just making a wild guess. So there you go.
Kelby says, I'm from Baltimore. What a shame. That's hilarious. that Baltimore sounds like Baal, so it must be pagan too.
Oh, I'm glad that you read that, because I saw it and I didn't quite understand what he was doing there.
He's just being silly. He's just making the word association.
Yeah, I saw it, but I was like, what? Why is there an extra A there? Oh, okay. Now that Mary explained it, that's actually quite awesome.
Yes.
Good joke there, but I didn't catch it. It went over my head. Sorry.
So Kelby Quire says Caesar also said that the Germans hunted a deer that only had one front leg and one back leg, and that rested by leaning on trees. I mean, that is the kind of stuff that just gets like mindlessly written down.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it sounds really, I mean, presumably someone told him that. It sounds really fanciful, and you remember it, and then you retain it, and you might forget, you might even originally have doubted it and thought it was silly, but then every time you forgot that, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember, I'm writing about these people, and yeah, they have a really cool deer over there.
Yeah.
And I did also want to point out that Pakistan Zindabad is in the chat. He said that Islam, his first comment was that Islam debunks the Bible. My religion, Islam, debunks the Holy Bible. He has made no attempt to actually engage, but as I pointed out to him, the Quran affirms the Holy Bible. So is the Quran wrong? I don't know.
Yeah.
Have a conversation with me, Pakistan Zindabad. I think this is the first time you've been here. I'm glad you're here. I would love to have a conversation with you. I gave you my email earlier. It's also in the video description of every video. Let's have a chat. I would love to hear how Islam debunks the Bible. That would be awesome. I want to have that discussion. I want to inform all my listeners, all my 25,000 or 24,000 subscribers, that Islam debunks the Holy Bible. You're only reaching like 5 people in the chat. You could talk to everyone on my channel. So email me,
Yep.
schedule
I
a
don't think
time.
he's listening.
I know,
He
but
doesn't have his volume on. Here we go.
I'm not sure I'm not sure he's a human being. Frankly, he might just be a spam bot, because he hasn't said anything remotely relevant or shown any attempt to engage with anyone. Anyway, let's get back on to topic here. Tone has an actual question.
Zindabad. Hang on. Pakistan Zindabad. Tell us you're listening, or I'm going to put you in timeout for 24 hours. Okay? So you have a short while to tell us you're listening, or else I'm going to put you in timeout. And I told him to turn on his volume about a minute before he should get that message. So.
All right. So Tone does actually have a relevant on-topic question here. Correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that you stated earlier how people don't have an issue with the pagan names of the days of the week and months, but they're up in arms about the term Easter. Yes, that's correct. That is what I said. And he said that's a valid point. And if Ask wasn't such an idiot and forced me to kick him out by spamming insults after insult after insult and not engaging in any way, I would ask him this question, right? And do you call the days of the week by the standard names, or do you go around saying first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, seventh day? Good question for him. But I thought that Tintin had asked a question, but he didn't really. He just asked if that's what I said, and yes, that is what I said.
All right. So, you guys, Carly Amin, Luke Murphy, shame. This is disreputable. They are honest with a lot of the materials, but then they'll just like say irrelevant things as if they matter, as if they make some kind of point. I think that they wanted to write about something, and then they realized that like nothing that they thought about like existed. But they still wrote the article anyway with all kinds of irrelevant nonsense. So first of all, if this is a Germanic tradition, if Eostre or Eostre, if she's supposed to be Germanic, why are we running to the Celtic Britons? Pagan Celtic religion had basically no impact on Anglo-Saxon culture. None. So we're running off to this unrelated culture. So the Celtic Britons were conquered by Rome after Caesar. Caesar wasn't the one who conquered them. But anyway, they're conquered by Rome. They largely, almost entirely, became Christian during the Roman era. Then the pagan Anglo-Saxons came over, conquered most of Britain itself, that island. Why would Celtic religion, which had basically died out and turned into fairy stories by the time the Anglo-Saxons arrived, why would anything that they did have anything to do with a Germanic custom brought with the Germanic religion of the Germanic Anglo-Saxons? I don't understand why you're even trying to make the connection. Carly and Luke, come on. What is this connection that you're trying to make? And I know that you picked your topic and then tried really hard to write something relevant, but this isn't relevant. It's not possible for it to be relevant. It makes no sense. Show me any influence of Celtic deities in the Germanic Anglo-Saxon religious system. It doesn't exist. So they make a great attempt to assert that there's some sort of special hair goddess, while they god or goddess, while they fully admit that he or she is totally unattested in art or in writing. So they're like, there must have been a hair goddess. Well, there are tons of anthropomorphic or not anthropomorphic, but like animalmorphic deities who have animal aspects and human bodies in various ways, like the very famous, usually called the god of the wild hunt in like modern Wiccan type circles or fantasy or whatever else, where you have a god with the horned god with the stag horns and things like that. There's Epona, who had an equine component. There was a bear goddess. There's a stag associated god, all of whom have these animal characteristics, who are well attested in art and sometimes also in writing. But there is no one associated with a hare. There are actual hares found in decorative elements. I'm talking to the supposed author of this. I'm letting everybody else know too, but I'm like, guys, this is embarrassing. So there are just hair elements and jewelry, but they're not associated with any deities. No evidence of any deity type of association. There is a warrior goddess of Boudica's tribe, and then just fact free, they're like, maybe this is a hair goddess. Because you feel like it ought to be? What's happening here? They later freely admit that there's no connection between any possible hair deity in the past and anything in Easter, and yet all of a sudden they want to make a warrior goddess whose name is known of Boudica's tribe. They want to make her a hair goddess just because that would be like cool or something.
Well, because there are hares or bunnies associated with Easter, therefore there must be a pagan goddess that these are stolen from. Therefore,
but they don't even argue that. They admit that cannot be true in their article. They admit that. So why are they trying to make this goddess a hair goddess when there is zero evidence of any hair? So why would your goddess of war? It's a goddess of war. Why would your goddess of war be a rabbit or a hare? like male hares fight, but why would your war god be a lagomorph, a hopping bunny? Like,
Everyone is scared of bunnies, Mary. It's perfectly natural for your war
it's
god to
like
be a bunny. It'll
the holy
intimidate all your
grail.
enemies when they see your war god bunny that you've never depicted in art in any way.
I mean, this is a Monty Python and the Holy Grail moment here, guys.
Ah, yeah, maybe it's that bunny.
The bunny coming across. That was like, they're just like, the ferocious bunny must be the symbol of this known war goddess. It's so weird and embarrassing to make this argument. So, well, they, not just she, but Luke Murphy and Amin Carley, that admits that equating Eostre to a dawn goddess isn't tenable. It's not etymologically possible. And yet she suggests anyway that some sort of relic of Proto-Indo-European that only survived in Kent because their village in eastern Kent called Eostre. And maybe Bede knew about this goddess in Kent, but why would she even get a name for a month? Why would a goddess that's incredibly obscure in Kent give her name to an entire month of the calendar? It just is baffling. Baffling. But they fully admit that Eostre, if real, has zero link to any hares or rabbits whatsoever, that there's no link. Like those two flat out state this. So,
Yeah,
it's just...
yeah, I want to make a point or two here.
Go ahead.
So again, this is technically an argument for science, right? That there's no other evidence for the existence of this god other than Bede's guess that the nymph was named after a goddess, which I would say that is a reasonable piece of evidence. Problem is, if this is a major goddess, you'd expect there to be multiple mentions of her. And if
she has a month named after her, she's a major goddess.
Yeah, I was going to say, if she's not a major goddess, she's some obscure goddess, maybe one reference is all you would expect to find, but you wouldn't expect the month to be named after a minor goddess that is, very low on the pantheon. So these two facts don't seem to go together very well. So that would be the one point I wanted to make. And then you ask the question, why are these authors making this connection here? Well, and I think let's be honest, I think the reason they do this is because they had to say something interesting in order to get published, and saying, well, there's no evidence, we have no idea, isn't very interesting. You can't get published for that. But all you have to do is read the article, and then
they're telling a lie.
And it's as simple as that.
Yeah, this is an electronic only journal, quote, peer reviewed. I think it's a pay for play. I really do, because this is just, these may be undergraduates trying to do something cool. I don't know, but this is bad. And the name of the article is Shifting Baselines of the British Hare Goddess. And it starts out going, there is no evidence whatsoever that there were any hare goddesses. But we found some jewelry with hares on it, so maybe, and then there was a goddess over here who was a war goddess, so maybe these hares that we found in jewelry are somehow associated with this goddess, and so maybe she was a hare goddess. And then Eostre definitely doesn't mean dawn month, but maybe there's a goddess anyway, and yeah, she isn't associated with hares at all, or rabbits or anything. That's totally made up. But we're putting her in this article anyway, because something. And then they admit that the only possible source for the Easter bunny of Victorian England, who suddenly shows up in Victorian England, is the German folk tradition that was first recorded in the 1500s. It's just, this whole article is just a disaster. It's embarrassing. Yes, goddess estrogen.
So forget this specific. Easter. Yeah, forget this specific article. That last point you made is actually really, really important there. The custom of associating bunnies with Easter or hares with Easter doesn't derive, there's no evidence before the 15th century. So for it to be connected to
16th century.
16th century, for it to be connected to a goddess that, if she existed at all, certainly ceased to exist by the time of Bede in the 8th century, makes zero sense whatsoever, right?
Yes.
Why are people saying in the 16th century, saying, oh, remember that old goddess from 1,000 years ago? Let's dig her back up and associate bunnies with Easter. Weird stuff, weird stuff. But this is what passes for academic writing sometimes, is you come up with some wild speculation, right, that there was an Easter, or I mean that there was a rabbit goddess. That part's wild speculation. Could be true, right? There's a slight possibility that there was an obscure goddess with this, even though there's no evidence. And then you take that as a fact and go from there
Yeah.
to derive how this
I
non-existent
just,
idea evolved over
oh,
time, right? That's what the article said. How the sorry, not Easter, I keep saying Easter, but
yeah.
I mean bunny. How the bunny goddess evolved over time was the name of the article, but they
Yeah,
still went
basically.
wild speculation to say that it existed in the first place.
Right, right. The shifting baselines of the British hair goddess. In Celtic Britain, no evidence. In Germanic Britain, no evidence. Yet the shifting baselines of the British hair goddess. Like, this is so embarrassing. And it's funny because the article actually didn't have each sentence taken alone was not actually false, but it's trying to trick you to give an impression that's utterly false. Now, what's even funnier, there is also a completely idiotic article in the popular Smithsonian magazine, which is a joke and a half to begin with, by the so-called scholar Talk Thompson, who is a scholar in the same sense that my dog is right here. He calls himself a folkloricist, which apparently means that he makes up folklore himself. Because he
In fairness, that's what the term could mean, right?
yeah.
Like you're a novelist, you write novels. So if you're a folklorist, you make up folklore.
He attempts to claim that the Romans or Greeks or both associated Venus with a hare, as in the hare was Venus's animal. And his example of this is a Renaissance painting. Not an ancient painting, a painting from 1490 that has Venus, Mars, and Cupid. And I'm not sure why Mars is with Venus, but whatever.
Well, because it's just a silly painting that isn't like by a practitioner of the religion whatsoever.
No. No.
So, I mean, just in case people are unfamiliar, during the Renaissance, the artists kind of got bored with drawing pictures of Jesus and Mary and the apostles and whatnot, and decided, oh, let's start drawing pictures of the Greek gods. It's not like they suddenly believed in them. They just said these would be cool art.
So Venus was married to Vulcan and then supposedly had a tryst with Mars, right? So here's Venus with her lover Mars hanging out with the baby Cupid. And it happens to have a white hare in it. Therefore, ancient Romans and ancient Greeks thought that the hare was Venus's special animal. However, her actual symbol was a myrtle. That was her main symbol. And roses were a lesser symbol, much lesser symbol, but mainly the myrtle. Now, there was one writer called Philostratus the Elder in the 3rd century AD. He asserted that Aphrodite particularly likes sacrifices of hares, but she was never depicted with them or with living hares, either one. Now, we have to understand, dead hares are associated with Cupid. Slaughtered hares. Why? Cupid himself is depicted as a youth, a young man, a teenager type of figure. Hare hunting was particularly associated with boys of that age, with youths, right? Because of this association of boys with hare hunting and a belief about hares that I'll go into in a second, the idea of Cupid hunting hares and defeating them and conquering them and slaughtering them was an image of the lover overtaking the beloved and conquering the beloved. So the hound would be like the lover, and the hare, the beloved, the object who is being conquered. Cupid is associated with essentially having victims more than anything else. He shoots people and makes them fall in love, and then they're helpless, right? He conquers. It's this conquering erotic kind of love, right? So he is a hare hunter, not often, but sometimes. Sometimes, not at all often, fairly infrequently depicted as a hare hunter, because there was also a belief that if you presented your own beloved with a hare and they ate it, then they would fall under your spell. So, like, there was this belief in a magical power of killing a hare and then presenting it to your beloved, and then they'll be conquered the way the hare was conquered by you, right? That
And
was
then
also part of it.
this is why we give each other hairs on Valentine's Day.
I
I
guess.
mean,
I mean,
if that was actually a custom, then
yes,
that
that
would
would
be
be like,
a reasonable connection that someone could draw. But
but
this doesn't seem to have anything to do with Easter whatsoever.
no. But the idea is the horny hound conquering the pure chaste hare, and more into this chaste pure hare later. So hares were associated with virginity, not with horn dogs, to put it another way. Now we talk about people going at it like bunnies, and bunnies are associated with promiscuity, right? If they do it like rabbits, it's promiscuity. However, hares were not and could not rabbits, hares. They could not be a symbol of sexual love or reproductive fertility, because ancient people noticed that hares that were pregnant could give birth and then, without any contact with a male, give birth to another later litter. So instead of thinking that hares were having tons and tons of sex, rather they thought that hares were able to asexually reproduce, that they were able to have more hares without ever having sex. And so they thought hares were a symbol of chastity, not having sex, reproducing outside of the idea of romantic love, because they didn't realize that hares were capable of like hanging on to semen and then using it later. They didn't realize that. Instead, they thought that these hares had never had sex and were able to just be this pure kind of symbol of pure reproduction. So they had like the motherly love because they gave birth to babies, but they didn't have sexual love. So this would be the world's dumbest association for an erotic love goddess, to say that she was equated to a hare in a special way. That's why the dead hare, the conquered hare, the hare that has been destroyed by the hound, was the symbol of essentially chastity conquered by erotic love. The hare, the living hare, is a symbol of the chastity and purity. Because of this, hares became symbols of Christ and the Virgin Mary. Why? Because they believed that they had this purity, and that because Christ was conceived without sex, Mary became pregnant without sex. Well, to them, they thought that was parallel because they thought hares had babies without sex. These are not slaughtered hunted hares, but living hares associated with them. Okay? But there's still no connection between early symbols of hares being Christ and the Eostre hare, because by the late 1500s, when the Eostre hare was invented as a silly story, the pure hare iconography was generally forgotten, and people didn't think that hares didn't have sex anymore. They just didn't think that anymore. So there's no continuity even there. It's not like, the Easter bunny because hare was a symbol of Christ because of purity. No, it's a spontaneous thing that popped up unrelated to this earlier stuff. But in the context of the ancient world, hares were associated with chastity and virginity if they were like alive and not killed in the idea of conquest and defeat of chastity, right? So hares were never sex bunnies to these people in the popular mind. They aren't social creatures, unlike rabbits. Rabbits are social. They live in warrens together. The hares are not social creatures, and they don't quite, and they don't reproduce as fast as bunnies do either. They're a lot more shyer of human beings, so you don't go outside and see, there's a nearby rabbit warren. You go outside, and now there are like 50 rabbits sitting in your garden that you have to chase out with a rake or shoot or catch or something, right? So this kind of idea of the massive bunny population explosion is specific to rabbits in the farmer's mind and not to hares, which were much less likely to be in heavy contact with people except whenever the crazy March hares were out fighting each other. So, thank you very much, Emmanuel. However, I have limits. I spend so many hours a week on this already.
Right. So Emmanuel, I think might be new here. I don't recognize the name. If you've been here before, my apologies. I don't recognize your name. Assuming you are actually new, Mary is on this channel every Tuesday with the same kind of in-depth teaching. We're currently going through the history of early Islam, and thus, if you want more Mary, there's lots more Mary on this channel. She had a stream in December on Christmas, very similar to, actually 2 streams on Christmas, very similar to what you're hearing today. So even if you're not interested in Islam and you just found the channel because of this video, I would at least encourage you to check those out.
Okay, and here's the final argument that you hear. We're about to wrap up. And this is that Easter is clearly a pagan fertility holiday celebrating the rebirth of the year in spring. Guys, it is profoundly stupid to associate renewing fertility or fecundity or anything like that with the first month of spring in Northern Europe. This only can happen in the context of hyperabundant food after the 17th century. Or really after the 18th century. I don't know why I wrote 17th. After the 18th century. And the 17th century famines were still really common. Only in the 18th century did they become less common, and the 19th very rare, except for the potato famine in Germany and in the UK. At that time, food became abundant and cheap, and people didn't go through the hungry gap, it was called. So you have lots and lots and lots of food when the harvest comes in. And it's also about the number of calories per unit, right? So you get your harvest in, you have tons of food. Along comes winter. You can't keep all of your animals alive throughout winter, all the babies that were born. You need to slaughter the ones that you don't have enough hay to keep through winter until spring's there, because you need to keep the pregnant ones through. And so the young ones that have fattened up, gotten old enough, you kill them all and you eat them in the winter. Now, if you go back to the important months of, here we go, here's the important months of the Germanic year. You go out here to, you get weed month. That's the month where you get all the weeds that are trying to kill your harvest. And then this holy month. Guess what this is? Holy month is a harvest month. Blood month.
I was going to say that's true in general of these polytheistic pagan cultures, that usually the harvest is the most important month in the calendar, not the spring, which is in the fall, universally.
Well, no, it's not. It's absolutely not in the fall. We're about to get to that. But it is in the fall in the northern and in Northern Europe. It is in the fall. And in Central Europe, it's in the fall. That's when your harvest is ready. It's in the fall. And then you have your blood month right before it's wintertime, and you don't have any supplies, and there are very few things to feed your animals on. Blood month is whenever you do the sacrifices of your main cattle and stuff. That's when those important months were. That's why there are so many religious activities here. And then there were some religious activities associated with your campaigning during the summer. Over here, here's you have your cakes month as things are easing toward the lean period. During the lean period, you're not having celebrations of celebrations of fecundity, fertility, renewing of this, renewing of that. You have little food. This is when you start planting. This is when you start plowing. You put your seed corn in the ground. If you eat it, you're dead. Hopefully, you have enough food to make it until things start coming along, when the big hunting seasons come up, things like that, and whenever you can actually start harvesting some of your livestock. Now, lambing is likely to begin in February and end in March, April, around this time. And then around March, April, it's the first time to eat a few young excess lambs if you choose to, around 2 months old, if grazing is tight. If not, you want them to fatten up a little bit longer too. You want them to get chubbier, right? Before you eat them, you want them to get as large as possible so you have more meat, but you can begin eating them then. Now, some chickens are just becoming broody in April and continue through June, but it takes 3 to 4 months. Back then, you don't get today you get 6-week chickens to eat. Back then, you took 3 to 4 months before you could eat the excess cockerels. You'd keep the hens till they got bigger and could lay eggs on their own, but the cockerels, most of them you'd eat young, but they're not available yet. Hunting is scarce at this time because most animals are just coming out of winter, and you don't kill females at all this time of year because they're probably pregnant with your next year's food. You don't kill them until they finish weaning all of their young. The cows are dried off before they give birth, so there's no milk. The next month after this is called the thrice milking month, because that's when the cows are, all the cows are born, the calves are born, and you have super abundant milk for a short while, so you can milk your cows 3 times a day, thus thrice milking month. At this time, the cows aren't yet giving birth, so there's no milk at all. This is the leanest month. We aren't cows. We don't eat grass. No human cares about spring rebirth, meaning the first surge of grass growth directly. It takes a long time for us to benefit from those things. So,
Well,
then,
I will say, in
yeah,
fairness, Mary, I will say that while we certainly don't care for food purposes, there is a certain psychological element of you got through the long winter and you're starting to see green again, that brings humans joy. So I will say that we do
well, it does
care
if you're
about
not hungry, but the problem was that a lot of times people were actively hungry then. So it was a time of hope, but of lots of worry.
Yeah, yeah. At very little least, it brings hope, right? Even if you are hungry, you see the sign that soon there will be food available, at least potentially, if you don't have a
I
a
mean, it could
dry
be like
summer. But
months and months there will be food. It's if winter continued, it would be worse, right?
right,
But it's also a massively busy time of year. You don't have time for feasts while you're trying to get the seed in the ground. You're spending almost all month plowing. So it's not a happy month of it's a hardworking month and lots of worry. Now, the seasons of the Jewish year are very different from these northern central times. So the former autumn rains are the October through March rains, which are the main growing season. You see the amount of rains per month. And then there are the latter spring rains in April or May. And that's when you need to get those are needed to get the wheat ripe. Let's see if I have, where is it? Ah, okay. So this latter rain is like literally, in a literal sense, much less than the former rain. But in a spiritual sense, God promises much more abundance in a second season. There are whole bunches of references to God's generosity during the latter rain specifically, as well as former and latter. Sometimes the latter is called spring, etc. But specifically, for example, Hosea 6:3, let us pursue the knowledge of the Lord. His going forth is established in the morning. He will come to us like rain, like the latter and former rain to the earth. And then there's kind of some more associations with latter, the latter glory, not rain, but glory of the house of God, meaning the temple, shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. But in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts, which was fulfilled when Christ came into the second temple, because before that, the presence of God had not come into the second temple that was built. And so the Jews were very concerned about God possibly having abandoned them even. So the idea of, the greater second Exodus, et cetera, all this pulled together. There's a very famous Pentecostal movement that developed through kind of the abuse of this, misunderstanding almost deliberately of this latter concept that's also described in Acts 16. But that does exist nevertheless, that there's these two periods of rain, and the period of rain, the growing season in Northern Europe, you plant in March, in Eostre month, right? You plant in March and it grows until like September-ish, up to October, right? And that's when you harvest. Here, you plant in September, October, and your first harvest you plant in April and then harvest then. Your first harvest in Israel is this April harvest of barley, and your second harvest is your wheat harvest. So it's a spring and summer harvest. The abundant times are actually not, these are abundant times in the Levant, not in Germany. Nothing abundant in Germany. Now, we get no time traveling uteruses. Easter is when it is because of Passover. Passover is a reason, and its timing, which was established by God in the 1200s or 1400s BC. It occurs just before the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of First Fruits. The Feast of First Fruits is the first of the barley harvest, not renewal, but harvest. Pentecost is the holy day of the wheat harvest. So the people who are pagan hunting are like, pagan harvest festival? No, it's a ceremonial metaphor that God set up over 1,000 years before Christ came. He was using this language. The ingathering of God's people is compared to the bringing in of grain into a barn on many occasions in the Bible. This is a metaphor that is enacted in metaphorical language in the Bible, in the feast that God established for the people, and in Christ's coming, resurrection, and the Pentecost. So Christ was the first fruit of the resurrection. Christ, who was born in Bethlehem, the house of bread, rose from the dead on the day of first fruits, in which the first of the barley harvest would be brought in and given in a wave offering over the altar. On the day of Pentecost, the Holy Spirit came down and initiated the church age. That is the wheat harvest, the beginning of the greater harvest. And since then, we have been in the age of the greater harvest. Many references to harvest in the Bible. That is what is being said here. And it is a physical, tangible parallel to physical things that people understood that God is making a metaphor to, just as he does with baptism and washing and everything else. He's giving us tangible reminders, and all of it is embedded in the biblical framework, nothing pagan about it. Christ's Passover is a greater Passover. Christ's Exodus is the greater Exodus, as Christ himself refers to. So that is my conclusion.
All right. Excellent. So I'll open this up in case someone wants to come and respond on topic, not just with any random thing. You can join the live chat now. We'll give some time for people to call in on that. But if not, we'll end after taking some of these comments. So first of all, let's start with a super chat from More K.
Wasting your time on social media is one of the best deeds a Muslim can do. There's a huge need for it. You know this and I know this. So that makes the reward even greater. So give generously and Allah Azza wa Jal will give you even more.
So Moore says, I'm giving alms for the unsubscriber. It's weird, right? At the start, I posted a link to your brother in Christ video, and I'll post that again at the end on a similar subject with a similar title where he says, like, the secret origins of Easter or something like that. And two people have commented in the comments that they unsubscribed for quote unquote attacking other Christians when the video does no such thing. So I don't know if people are like just so have such short attention spans that they can't be bothered to see what you're actually saying and just make guesses. Um, I mean, there's certainly people like that. I just don't know why they'd be subscribed to my channel in the first place, because all of my videos are these very in-depth teaching, very much not oriented at soundbite pop culture. So thank you for the donation.
I'm gonna
And,
grab something to drink. Be right back.
and I couldn't care
find
less.
my drinks. I swear I had a ton in here, and now I'm baffled.
No worries. And I couldn't care less if people unsubscribe. You know, if they're not interested in my content, then they don't have to watch it. I really couldn't care less. And if they're going to come to snap judgments and not consider arguments, they're on the wrong channel anyway. So they shouldn't be subscribed. They're not the audience I'm looking for. Several comments along this line. This one from Wormius. Every year it's the same thing. Pagan Easter, pagan Christmas. I swear it never ends. And from Vince, and these weren't the only two, but I highlight these two. Twice a year we hear from Alexander Hislop and his messenger, Jack Chick. And yeah, I mean, it'll never end, right? Because people who make these kinds of arguments, if you can even call them arguments, generally have no interest in truth whatsoever. They're just interested in repeating the sensational soundbite, either because they hate a certain group and they will attach it to that group. Group might vary. By certain group, I'm not being vague. I mean, the person might vary as to what they hate.
Yeah, Jack.
Or
Chick
because,
is no
like
bigger fan.
Ask earlier, they think that this gives themselves some self-righteous superiority to other Christians. So those two things will always exist. So we'll have to do this kind of thing every year. But it's not pointless, right? Because Alan Olive came into the chat and was making comments along these lines. And at some point he commented about he calmed down and he had good interaction thereafter. And I'm very glad. If this stream does nothing else, I think that it helped Alan, and I'm very appreciative of that. It says, Mary, he, meaning his pastor, taught me to trust any man. I think he meant not to trust any man with my salvation or interpretation of the scripture. Always check them out. He was right. That includes him. I'm all for learning the truth, Mary. And that's exactly the right attitude to have. I encourage people to fact check us as well, right? Don't just take our word for it. Mary does do her homework. She does an amazing job, but she's not infallible. She can make mistakes. Bede did a great job of writing the history of the church, but he made some mistakes. We shouldn't just take someone's word for it. We should verify things for ourselves.
Yeah, I make mistakes too. Like I'm not perfect. I'll misspeak. I'll make mistakes, but I do like try to source and research things and show evidence for things.
Right.
And the thing is, I think we want to believe the correct thing. We want purity. We don't want things to. I mean, a lot of things can slip in easily. Using things as magical spells is like a massive kind of eternal temptation for things that can slip easily. That's what people revert to. It is a pagan thing that people revert to. And the Protestant Germans, picking on the Protestant Germans now, actually did that. They would use certain verses as if they had spell powers and started doing that, even though they weren't doing other things that had parallels to paganism that they rejected. They would do that in terms of folklore. You will find the same thing, a completely separate development occurred in Appalachia. Appalachia. Sorry for all the Appalachians out there who want it pronounced correctly. The Appalachians and the hollers and stuff, people came up with folk medicine that was partly magic because people revert to magic. Now, one thing that differentiates Christianity from false religions is that these magic is baked into the false religions and only often infiltrates Christianity and has to be constantly kind of shown the door, like, nope, can't do that. That's witchcraft, guys. Don't try to be a witch. You can't do that. You can't use the Bible like it's witchcraft. Stop it. Like, these are things that you have to watch against, and that's a good thing to try to be try to not do things that are authentically pagan, but at the same time, we have to understand what real paganism is and carefully analyze whether or not something is pagan or not.
Alan Olive says, we as believers should be able to defend our faith, rightly dividing God's word. Jesus said people perish for lack of knowledge. I agree 100%. And your attitude today, Alan, has been amazing. I would say, I would apologize for being harsh with you at the beginning, but also it perhaps got through to you. So if you took offense, I do apologize for you taking offense, but I don't regret anything that I said. And like you said, you were amazing today. I'm glad you're here. Alexander Damon says the Catholics also do that too, like a lot. I see this from living in a 97% Catholic country. I don't know what this refers to, but
Well,
I mean,
there's some,
error is universal, right?
yeah,
It's not like Catholics are immune from error. It's not like Protestants are immune from error, or hatred or whatever else you were referring to. Definitely, lots and lots of people, including lots and lots of Christians, close off their mind, live in an echo chamber, and don't want to hear anything else. And that's really sad. If you're lucky enough to be a Christian, you might be okay despite that. But if you're in any other belief system, that's going to lead you to hell. So people really need to wake up and be open to the possibility they're wrong. You know, it's not that likely that you were born with or that you're born into a family where your parents have exactly the right beliefs on every single thing, unless you can just blindly go with what your parents say. We do have Ahmed who has joined the chat. Welcome, Ahmed.
Hi, Mary. Can you hear me?
Ooh, you're really quiet.
How about now? Is it okay now?
Yes, much better. Sorry.
Okay. How are you? How are you guys?
Excellent.
Doing well.
Okay.
So I heard so, and then I didn't hear anything after that.
Yeah. So I have a doubt. So normally, so when you guys speak about that resurrection, like Jesus died for your sins, then because of that one we don't need to keep the law. So, but when I study the Bible, not New Testament especially, I can see the disciple of Jesus kept the law even after the death. So it doesn't make sense. So if the disciples are the people who know about Jesus, who studied with Jesus, so they have more knowledge than any other people. So if really Jesus died for the sins, then if you do not need to keep the law,
So
why
have
the
you
disciples?
actually, hang on, have you actually read Acts? You're saying that you've read it, but I don't think
Yeah,
you've actually read it.
yeah,
What?
it's in Acts. Yeah, can I share the link? It's in Acts of the Apostle, written by
So
Luke.
let's look at Acts 15 and let's see what it says. Okay, or
Okay.
actually it may start in Acts 14.
Okay.
Let's do ESV. ESV, because I'm just used to reading it.
I'll put it up for you, Mary, no problem. Acts 14 is where you want to start?
Yeah.
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
It's Acts 21.
Rare that I didn't have Logos open, but I'm opening it now.
Well, we need to talk about where there are talks about the, there we go, Bible Hub. Okay.
Okay.
I got it already. Hang on. Nice and big. Sorry, I didn't put it into Bible Hub at first. There was a problem. All right. All right. Paul and Barnabas return to Antioch in Syria. This is just kind of the setting up the scene for things happening in the next chapter. Then they, Paul and Barnabas.
And Mary, if you could make it wider.
Sorry. Larger still.
Well, the type is fine, but you got more space available. So if you make the window wider, you'll get more words. Otherwise, we just got some black space. There you go. Much better.
Okay. So then they, Paul and Barnabas, passed through Pisidia and came to Pamphylia. And when they had spoken to the word in Perga, they went down to Attalia. From there, they sailed to Antioch. Here we are in Antioch, where they had been commanded to the grace of God for the work that they had fulfilled. And when they arrived and gathered the church together, they declared all that God had done with them and how he had opened a door of faith to the Gentiles. And they remained no little time with the disciples. So they were there for quite a while. But some men came down from Judea and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. So, Ahmed, what were these new people from Judea teaching about the law?
Okay, let me tell you. So now, the thing is, when the Paul went to the Gentiles, then the questions come whether they need to keep the law or not. Then,
well, this is what this is saying. So what does this mean? And people are saying, people come down from Judea.
Yeah.
And they were teaching the brothers. Who are the brothers?
Brothers mean Gentiles, who have accepted Christianity. They're teaching you have to keep the law. Yeah.
Yep, it's both. The brothers means, brothers means all the people who believe in Jesus and who are followers of Jesus, okay? Okay, so these folks come down from Judea. They're teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you can't be saved. So they're telling them they have to do what? That they have to keep the law. Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so these people are coming down and saying you have to keep the law. Let's see what Paul and Barnabas had. After Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and debate with them. So, did Paul and Barnabas agree with them that they needed to keep the law?
No. According to them, no need to keep the law.
Okay, you don't have to. So, they had a disagreement. So then Paul and Barnabas and some of the others were appointed to go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. So now they're going to go where there are a bunch of apostles and elders together. We're going to find out, do people who were not Jews and had not lived as Jews, do you need to keep the law to be saved? So to be a brother, do you need to keep the law? To be saved means to continue to be a brother, right? So, being sent on their way by the church, they passed through various places. They described the conversion of the Gentiles, brought great joy. Then they come to Jerusalem. Then they were welcomed by the church of the apostles, etc. They told again what had happened. Then it says, but some believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees rose up and said, it is necessary to circumcise them and to order them to keep the law of Moses. So, these folks, these from the party of the Pharisees, are saying that now, to be saved, they need to be circumcised and they need to keep the law of Moses. So circumcision, of course, comes from Abraham, but it was inherited into the law of Moses and became a part of that too. Yeah. But let's see what happens. The apostles and the elders were gathered together to consider the matter. And after there had been much debate, Peter, so do you know who Peter is?
I know. His other name is Cephas. I know it. Second most important.
So he's another apostle. He stood up and he said to them, brothers, you know that in the early days God made a choice among you, that by mouth the Gentiles should hear the word of the gospel and believe. And God, who knows the heart, bore witness to them by giving them the Holy Spirit, just as he did to us. And he made no distinction between us and them, having cleansed their hearts by faith. Now, therefore, why are you putting God to the test by placing a yoke on the neck of the disciples that neither our fathers nor we have been able to bear. So what is meant here by why are you putting God to a test by placing a yoke? What does all that mean?
Yeah, I know this matter because when I come to the Gentiles do not need to keep the law. Even according to Old Testament, the Gentiles, they only need to keep the 7 law of Noah. I know that. Even James,
So are we Gentiles? Are Mary and I Gentiles?
yes, even I'm Gentile.
Okay, so then what is your objection exactly?
My objection is Paul is teaching completely. Paul is telling even the Jews do not need to keep the law. That is the issue. Paul is going
Where
against
is
the
he
teaching
teaching
of
that?
Jesus.
Well, the Jews don't need to keep the law anymore because the law has passed away. Ahmed, can the Jews keep the law now?
Of course, yes.
They can or they can't?
Of course, yes. They can
How can they keep the law?
sacrifice in the temple.
No, because temple. Okay, no. Normally, I know
The
this.
So if
the
you do not, hang
temple
on.
is a physical building. You're required to sacrifice in the temple. You cannot keep the law without the temple.
Okay, no. When you come to the temple was built by the Solomon. Before Solomon, no temple. Moses was given the law. So almost for 600 years, there was no temple.
No. Ahmed, where were the people told to sacrifice at the time of Moses specifically? Where
In
what was?
In the Ark of the Covenant, there was a tent.
Okay, awesome. The Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah,
and
tabernacle.
That tent, the tabernacle, right? They had to go there. Could they go anywhere else according to the law of Moses except where the Ark of the Covenant was? Can they go anywhere else?
Yeah, I think yes. They can do.
No,
Because
you can't. So you can only perform the sacrifices at that place where the Ark of the Covenant was with the tabernacle.
Oh no.
After
no, even during the temple the temple was there. The people in the Judea, northern kingdom, they don't need to come to the Jerusalem to do the sacrifice.
Oh, they absolutely did.
They
If they didn't, they were in rebellion from God. Ahmed, that's part of the reason why they were taken away and lost and destroyed.
It's ironic that you're telling us about the law when you actually don't know what the law is.
So one of the things they did that was illegitimate, Ahmed, one of the things they did that was illegitimate, that meant that many of them turned into Samaritans and other people outside of the covenant. They were no longer in the covenant, was because they did not come to the temple the way they were supposed to. It wasn't optional. So before the temple was built, there was the Ark of the Covenant. After the temple was built, what was it built for? To house the Ark of the Covenant. And what did God do after the temple was built to show that this was his new resting place? Do you know?
Yeah, because this is good. So after the temple was built, Ark of the Covenant was placed inside the temple, and we had to do sacrifices there. Also.
Okay, but what happened after? So they brought the Ark of the Covenant into the temple, and then what happened?
After the temple, they used to sacrifice in the temple. The people in the Jerusalem.
Well, hang on, Ahmed. A miracle occurred to show everyone that this was the place that you were to come to. So the glory of the Lord filled the Holy of Holies, and thus that validated that God's presence was associated with that place, and that's where you had to come for God. So after that point, if somebody took the if they took the Ark of the Covenant outside of that, it didn't matter. That was still the place you had to come to. So the temple was now where the place where the glory of the Lord was. You couldn't go anywhere else. Even if the Ark of the Covenant was taken out, as it was taken out and eventually hidden or destroyed or lost, that was still the place you had to come to. You could come to no other place and still keep the law because God had revealed himself there, and that was the place that he had ordered to be built for people to come to. So, you can't go anywhere else. So without that place,
jump in.
Go ahead.
So my wife is upset that the stream is still going on. I told her it would be over by now, and this obviously has nothing to do with the subject of the day. So if we could wrap this up in 10 minutes, that would be great.
All right, so very quickly, in AD 70, that was destroyed. No Jew has ever kept the law after that point at any point. They have been unable to, because they cannot do the most important points of the law. They can't keep it. So do keep in mind that it was not through grace or through law that the Jews were saved, but rather through grace. We believe that the Gentiles will be saved through grace, that we will be saved through grace, just as the Gentiles will. And Barnabas and Paul repeated the signs, etc., etc. And by the way, Paul had companions who were Gentiles, and they didn't keep the law. They were never circumcised. Now, as you go on, Paul says that those who are circumcisers, who say that people need to be circumcised, they should.
Mary, my point is this one. Okay, now you talk about the temple, everything. Okay, that's fine. Now I don't. My point is, even after death of Jesus, disciples, they went to the temple. They did animal sacrifice. Even Paul did animal sacrifice in the temple. So how come? Because these disciples, they know Jesus died for their sins, so they do not keep the law. Then why after the death, for 30 years, until the temple was destroyed, they used to keep the law, they used to pray, they used to fast, they used to keep the Sabbath, they used to do even animal sacrifice in the temple.
So what does it say? We believe that we will be saved through the grace of the Lord Jesus, just as the way they will. Paul and the rest did not say that they thought that they would be saved through the law. They kept the law because the temple itself was still standing. And so the law had not yet passed away. As it says in Hebrews, the law will pass away. It will disappear. It will go away. It no longer has any, it's void now, but it's still existing. This period of time where both were running in parallel.
My point is, the Paul is going against the Peter and James. That is my point. So how can Paul do that?
Paul is not against Peter and James. This is Peter speaking. Peter said that we are saved by grace. We are not saved through the yoke that we have been unable to bear. We are saved through grace. Then James also says, brothers, listen to me. Simeon has related how God first visited the Gentiles to take from them a people for his name. And here are the words that are written, etc., etc. Therefore, my judgment is that we should not trouble those of the Gentiles who turn to God, but should write to them to abstain from things polluted by idols, from sexual immorality, and for what has been strangled in blood. So James is agreeing that they should not be asked to be circumcised.
Yeah, that is for the Gentiles. Jews has to keep the law. That is the point. Paul is telling even the Jews do not need to keep the law. That's my point. Because when it comes to Gentiles, it is very
oh my
clear.
Goodness! And guess what?
Okay, so
Peter says. Peter says that Jews are not saved by the law. You're saying Peter's a liar. You're saying Peter says Jews aren't saved by the law, but really Peter means that they are saved by the law. If they don't follow it, they'll go to hell. That's what you're saying. You're saying that Peter is a liar here, and he really means the opposite of what he says.
No.
But yes, Thaddeus, we do need to go. Ahmed, they agreed with Paul. Here they are, standing with Paul in agreement. They agree with Paul. You cannot say they don't agree with Paul because they're standing here agreeing with Paul. Peter and James and Paul are in agreement here.
Yeah, the saved by the grace means still you have to keep the law. That's the point.
No,
that's not what grace means.
No one said that.
Where does it say that?
Where does it say Jews must keep the law to be saved? Because right here,
so
Peter says
Mary,
don't.
Can we go to Acts 11 real briefly?
Yes.
Or I'm sorry, Acts 10. Acts 10.
Okay, no, the point is made. So maybe we can have this discussion later. Whenever I come, maybe sometime I am too late for the discussion. Maybe you can keep this later. My point is very clear. So here, what James is telling, the Jews, Gentiles do not keep the law. That automatically means that Jews has to keep the law.
He
Otherwise,
never said that. You're just lying. And look at what it says here. So Peter has a vision, and a voice came to Peter telling him there is something like a great chief descended.
Yeah. Let me just highlight a couple of lines
Go ahead.
here, Mary, real quick. So Peter said. Peter falls asleep. There's some miraculous instance of why he falls asleep, but that's irrelevant. While he's sleeping, a voice comes to him and says, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." He sees a sheet of unclean animals, and he says, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean." So then the voice tells him to do it a second time and a third time. And he wakes up. He doesn't understand the vision, and then a individual comes to him, right? A pagan, non-Jewish person, a Gentile, whatever you want to call him, comes to him, and
I know that. Thaddeus, I know that.
can you let me finish? Can you let me finish? I have something. Verse 28,
Okay.
right? Jump to verse 28, Mary. That's the one I want to read. So Peter says to them, "You yourselves know how unlawful it is for a Jew to associate with anyone or visit anyone of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean." Peter says, God has showed me to not keep the law anymore. Not just that I don't have to, but that I should not keep this law anymore. And yet you tell us that the message of the New Testament, the message of Acts, is to keep the law if you're a Jew.
Right. Here it is still in talking about the unclean animal. It is not talking about the Sabbath or anything other thing else, right? So here
He's
it is
saying,
showing.
no. You said that he believes that they have to keep the law. But right here he says, you yourselves know how unlawful it is for the Jew to associate with or visit anyone of another nation. Peter is calling his own actions unlawful because God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. So any person common or unclean.
So here, so I was unable to present in here.
The point here, isn't the specific law.
Not?
He is told not to follow the law, a specific law.
Here it is talking about not associate because at the time Jews, they were thinking other people.
Do you see the word unlawful?
And how means very, right? You yourselves know it is very unlawful for a Jew to associate with, etc. This is something that no Jew should ever do according to the law. God tells Peter, not Paul. Paul's not involved. Paul's not in this circumstance whatsoever. God tells Peter directly that he should break the law, that he should not keep the law. It's one specific law, but if you break one specific law, you break all of the law.
No, it doesn't mean that, Thaddeus. Even Jesus said, no, you can work on Sabbath. That doesn't mean he violated the Sabbath.
Ahmed, he hadn't died yet, honey. And also, he says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. What does that mean? Does the Sabbath have law over Christ, or does Christ have dominion over the Sabbath? Christ has dominion over the Sabbath. He is the king, the Lord of the Sabbath, because he is God. Now, is it breaking the law for Peter to do what he did? Yes or no? According to Peter right here. Let's see if you're going to be honest. Ahmed, can you be honest? You yourselves know how unlawful it is. Is he breaking the law? Yes or no?
Here what he is doing is Peter is not associating him with the Gentiles. So
oh my goodness. Yes, he is associating the Gentiles with Gentiles. Yes, Peter is associating with Gentiles.
You should not call any person. This is not a special exception for Cornelius. It says, God has shown me that I should not call any person common or unclean. Yeah, why would according to Christian theology, why would this be the case? Let's see if you have any understanding whatsoever.
No, my point is very clear. Okay, now here, so
who are the people of God according to Christ?
Jesus himself said, "Follow the law, teach the law."
Answer the question, please.
Who the real children of Abraham are? Who are they according to him?
Real children may be under the covenant. The people who are under, because only the circumcised people are under the covenant, according to.
No, he did not say that. Quit lying. He said that people like you who don't follow him and believe in him might be the physical children of Abraham, but you are actually the spiritual sons of Satan. But the real children of Abraham are those who believe in him. That's what Christ said. So I think that we should leave it here because you don't want to be honest, because Peter here is saying that God himself told him to break the law, and you're going, no, God told him to keep the law, or maybe just break it for Cornelius or just one person. It's an exception. It's not true. Ahmed, read the text. Quit reading what Muslims write about it. Read the literal words that it says. Promise me that you will read Acts, the book of Acts, before you bring this up again. Will you read it?
Yeah, I read it. Now, here point is,
don't read. Now listen, don't read what anyone says about it. Read the words and see what's happening. That's what's important, because people are going to try to lie and trick you. The actual words, law and lawful.
Yeah, it is telling, I'm telling here, Peter is violating only one commandment. So,
only one.
No, one commandment throws you out. You're done.
Yeah, well,
Ahmed,
I mean,
that's
yeah,
it.
you're right.
Law's gone.
Did you listen to the words I said? I said, yes, it's literally one law. He is told by God to break one law, which means he violates the law. He doesn't keep the law.
Yeah,
all right, so we're in agreement that Peter is violating the one law. Thank you, Ahmed. We'll talk to you again another time. I do really need to wrap up. And Mutaz also joined. So Mutaz, you got just a couple minutes. I really need to wrap up for my wife's sake. But I want to give you a chance to say something since you were kind enough to join.
Okay. Salam al-Masih.
Salam al-Masih.
My name is Mu'taz al-Muhammadi. I'm from Saudi Arabia, and I just want to share some good news for you guys. Maybe that will make you guys happy. You know what I'm saying? Because it seems like you guys have been really tired and doing all this work on your own. We actually built the first church in the city of Riyadh between Neo, which is a Coptic church, and there's a lot of people are accepting the Lord Jesus. You know what I'm saying? So that's yeah,
awesome.
that's just that's just one of the good news. And also, I myself, I accepted the Lord Jesus Christ 8 months ago, and I've been studying the Bible, and man, let me tell you, it is way superior than the Quran.
It makes sense. You could just read it.
You know what I'm saying?
Awful.
Exactly. You don't need tafsir. You don't need any these stuff at all. It literally speaks for itself. But can you guys give me a assistant? How can I prove the Trinity in the Old Testament? I already know that the Trinity is in the New Testament, and it's very easy for me to prove it. But in the Old Testament, I'm kind of having a difficulty or a challenge. You know what I'm saying?
A lot
Absolutely.
of the, here, let me find, Anthony Rogers has many streams about it. I'm putting this into the chat right now. I don't know whether or not you can see the chat or not, but you can just jump back to it. I'm also going to put it in the conversation right here. So he has tons of stuff. It's hours and hours and hours of content. So, and there's all kinds of things there that will take you like 30 hours to go through.
Yeah, you can't answer that question in just a couple minutes. I mean, we could one example or something, but so it is throughout. It does permeate the Old Testament. It is, or at least divine plurality. You know, that God is multi-personal. The number 3, you know, that's a little bit more subtle and more difficult to demonstrate directly. But the fact that God is multi-personal is found throughout the entire Old Testament. That a lot of the theology, a lot of the passages only make sense if God is multi-personal.
And one thing that is mentioned that Jesus brought up, for example, is the statement in Genesis 1:20, 27, 26. Oh my goodness, I forgot. Anyway, that let us make man in our image. God does not speak in, there is no plural of majesty. Like God does not speak in plurals like that. And the idea that God is both without image and has an image, and we are made after an imitation of that image in some way, is fundamental to the multi-personality of God, and is introduced incredibly early, and is this continuing theme of the God who hears and sees and who is with you, and also the God who is transcendent, and both are simultaneously true in very important ways.
Excellent. So I won't read all of the comments that I had saved just in interest of time. Thank you all for tuning in today. Thank you, Jack Ray, for your super chats, as you always do. Just a couple things I did want to address here. So Emmanuel said, could you make these slides available to download or see somewhere? So Mary, can you get
Yeah, I need to
those?
upload everything to my, I will do that tomorrow. I'll upload everything. Sorry, guys.
Yep. So as soon as Mary gives me uploads it and gives me the link, I'll put that in the video description. He also said that we need to do the Islamic equivalent of this with Islamic customs, which would no doubt actually provide substantiated points, Kaaba, Blackstone, three goddesses,
I've been doing
etc.
that for months.
So what I will say is that the practices clearly derive from pagan customs. I will say, in fairness to Muslims, however, that doesn't mean that they are worshiping the same God as the pagans did, or the same deities as the pagans did, because your intent does matter, right? So even if it is true, which I think it is, that Muhammad is borrowing pagan customs and incorporating them into Islam, it suggests something about him, but it doesn't suggest anything about a modern Muslim who's still following that practice. They're just following the practice because it's custom at this point. So I do want to make that important clarification in fairness to modern Muslims.
Yeah, but if Allah is the one ordaining you to do the same thing that the Muslim, that the pagans did with pagan meaning, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it definitely says something about Muhammad. It's definitely a valid criticism of Islam, but I would not say that a Muslim
Yeah.
worships
Okay.
a pagan god. Okay, I wouldn't
Okay.
say that because I'll give you 60 seconds to make your point. I'm trying to be generous here, right? And say even if I'm correct, and the Blackstone, for example, was used in pagan practice before the time of Muhammad, that does not mean that it has a pagan meaning to a modern Muslim. Go ahead, Amin.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Teddy. So maybe we can have a separate discussion because last time also we joined for the about the sin and forgiveness. So maybe how about next week? Because I just got email you, but how about next week? We
Yeah,
can
so
have.
I'm well behind on email. I appreciate you emailing me. I will try to remember to respond to you tonight and
Yeah,
get a
he's
time
made
for
it
you.
through January.
To be clear, I'm further behind than when your email came in, but I will look for your email and respond to it.
Okay. Okay, Teddy. So we can have a sense, so we can understand each other. That's
Yep,
will be.
perfect. All right, so Kelv says, the only spell I want is the Goss spell. So thank you, everyone. Have a very blessed Easter. Have fun celebrating with your family, whatever you do, right? However you recognize the resurrection of the Lord is fine by me. Do remember to keep your mind on what actually matters. There was a couple comments along the lines of things like a bunny distract from the true message of Easter. And I would say that's a fair critique, right? I would say that is a fair thing to say. If you're only concentrating on pop cultural elements, while those elements themselves aren't pagan or aren't sinful, if you then lose sight of what Easter is all about, then it has become a major problem. Remember that what we're actually celebrating is that Jesus died for our sins and rose from the dead, proving once and for all,
He is my Lord.
Thank you for
Amen.
joining
Amen.
us today. Amen. We will be back on Tuesday with Mary to continue our look at the life of Muhammad. I'll try to get a stream scheduled next weekend with Ahmed or another Muslim to have a good conversation on a topic of their choice. Until then, God bless everyone. Go and serve the Lord.